The real cost of always being the calm one for everyone else is not seen at first. It hides behind your patience, your silence, your soft voice, and your ability to understand people even when they hurt you. They call you strong because you do not explode. They call you mature because you do not complain. They call you peaceful because you keep holding the room together. But if being calm has truly brought you peace, why do you feel so heavy inside? Why do you feel tired after listening to everyone? Why do you feel alone, even when so many people need you? The truth is, emotional burden can wear the face of kindness, and sometimes the person who looks the most peaceful is the one carrying the storm no one ever asks about. Buddhist wisdom teaches that compassion is beautiful, but carrying everyone's suffering as if it belongs to you is not compassion. It is self-abandonment. Real peace is not forcing yourself to stay quiet so others can feel comfortable. Real peace is knowing when to breathe, when to step back, when to stop absorbing pain that was never yours to carry. Tonight, as these lessons unfold, something inside you will begin to wake up. Your heart will start to understand that you can love people without becoming their emotional shelter. You can be kind without disappearing. You can be calm without becoming empty. This is not just another message about patience. This is a journey back to your own peace. Are you ready? Let's begin. There comes a moment when the calm person finally notices something painful. While everyone around them feels lighter after speaking, they somehow feel heavier after listening. While others release their emotions, they absorb them. While everyone sees them as stable, supportive, and emotionally strong, inside they are slowly becoming tired in ways they cannot explain. And that quiet exhaustion does not happen overnight. It grows little by little, hidden beneath kindness, patience, and the habit of always being there for everyone else. Some people carry stress in obvious ways. They become angry, reactive, loud, or emotionally distant. But emotional burden does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like the friend who always says, "It's okay." Sometimes it looks like the person who comforts everyone while secretly feeling empty. Sometimes it looks like you. The hidden exhaustion of always being emotionally available for others is one of the most invisible forms of suffering because the world praises it. People admire calm people. They trust them. They lean on them. They call them mature, grounded, and emotionally intelligent. But very few people stop to ask what it costs to constantly carry the emotional weight of other human beings. At first, it feels meaningful. Being needed can feel comforting. Being the person others trust can make you feel important. You answer late-night phone calls. You calm arguments. You listen to people cry. You try to understand everyone's pain. You become the safe place others run to when life hurts them. And because you care deeply, you tell yourself this is simply what love looks like. But slowly, without realizing it, your own emotional world begins to disappear beneath everyone else's needs. You stop checking how you feel because you are too busy managing how others feel. You stop asking yourself what hurts you because there is always another person having a crisis. Your sadness gets postponed. Your exhaustion gets ignored. Your emotional wounds remain untouched because you have trained yourself to believe your role is to carry, not to collapse. This is where emotional burden quietly becomes dangerous. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering often grows not only from pain itself, but from attachment and identity. And many calm people become attached to the identity of being emotionally strong. They begin to believe they must always remain composed, always patient, always understanding, always available, even when their spirit is exhausted. The problem is not compassion. Compassion is beautiful. The problem is losing yourself inside the role of emotional caretaker. Many people who are emotionally available for everyone else secretly live in a constant state of emotional alertness. Their nervous system rarely rests. Even when nothing bad is happening, their mind stays prepared for emotional emergencies. They constantly monitor the moods of people around them. They notice tone changes, facial expressions, silence, energy shifts. They become emotional weather detectors without realizing it. Over time, this creates deep exhaustion inside the body. You may think you are just tired, but sometimes your body is carrying years of emotional responsibility. Your mind has become so used to holding space for others that relaxing feels unnatural. Even when you are alone, your brain keeps scanning for problems to solve. This is why some calm people feel strangely restless at night. Their body may be still, but their nervous system remains awake. Part of them is still emotionally on duty, still listening, still worrying, still carrying. Many emotionally available people also struggle with guilt when they try to step back. The moment they stop responding quickly, stop fixing problems, or stop emotionally rescuing people, they feel selfish. This happens because they have unconsciously tied their worth to usefulness. They feel valuable when needed. And this creates a painful cycle. The more emotionally dependable you become, the more people expect it from you. Not because they are evil, but because human beings naturally lean toward comfort. If someone always listens, people keep talking. If someone always gives emotional support, people keep returning. If someone always sacrifices themselves quietly, people slowly begin to assume that sacrifice costs nothing. But it does cost something. It costs energy. It costs mental peace. It costs emotional balance. Sometimes it even costs physical health. There are people who have spent years being emotionally available for everyone else and now no longer know how to relax without guilt. Rest has become uncomfortable because they have built their identity around emotional labor. Their mind constantly asks, "Who needs me?" instead of asking, "What do I need?" And one of the saddest parts is that emotionally available people often hide their exhaustion very well. They smile while overwhelmed. They comfort others while breaking inside. They say, "I'm fine," because they do not want to become another burden for someone else to carry. They become so used to supporting people that receiving support feels unnatural to them. Sometimes when someone finally asks how they are doing, they do not even know what to say. Not because they have no emotions, but because they have ignored their own feelings for so long that they no longer know how to access them clearly. Buddhist teachings often speak about awareness, about paying attention to what is happening inside the mind and body before suffering grows too large. But many emotionally available people spend so much time observing others that they stop observing themselves. They can read everyone else's emotions, but cannot understand their own exhaustion. They can comfort everyone else's pain, but cannot sit honestly with their own loneliness. And loneliness is very common among calm people, not because nobody loves them, but because very few people truly see them. Everyone sees their strength, their patience, their wisdom, their calmness. But very few people ask what exists underneath all of that emotional control. Sometimes the calmest person in the room is the most emotionally overwhelmed person there. They have simply become skilled at hiding it. This hidden exhaustion also creates emotional numbness over time. When you constantly absorb other people's emotions, your inner world becomes crowded. Eventually, your heart begins protecting itself by shutting down certain feelings. You may stop feeling excitement deeply. Joy becomes muted. Even rest no longer feels fully restful because part of you remains emotionally tense. This is not weakness. It is emotional overload. The human spirit was not designed to endlessly absorb the suffering of others without care for itself. One of the reasons Buddhism emphasizes balance is because imbalance always creates suffering eventually. Even kindness becomes painful when it is rooted in self-erasure. Even patience becomes destructive when it requires abandoning your own emotional truth. Some people learned very early in life that being calm kept them safe. Maybe they grew up around conflict. Maybe they had emotionally unstable parents. Maybe they learned that suppressing their emotions reduced tension in the house. So they became the peaceful one, the mature one, the understanding one. But survival patterns from childhood often become emotional prisons in adulthood. Now they feel responsible for everyone's emotions. If someone is upset, they immediately feel pressure to fix it. If someone is angry, they become anxious. If relationships feel unstable, they panic internally even if they appear calm outside. This creates chronic emotional fatigue because they are carrying emotional responsibilities that were never fully theirs to begin with. And yet society often rewards this behavior. People praise the person who never complains, the one who sacrifices quietly, the one who remains calm no matter how overwhelmed they feel. But emotional suppression is not peace. It is often delayed exhaustion. Real peace includes honesty. Real peace allows space for your own emotions too. Real peace does not require you to disappear so others can feel comfortable. Many emotionally available people also struggle with resentment they do not fully understand. Deep down, part of them begins feeling hurt that nobody seems to care for them the way they care for others. But because they are compassionate people, they often feel guilty for having this resentment, so they suppress it too. But suppressed emotions do not disappear. They settle deeper into the body. Sometimes this emotional burden appears physically: tightness in the chest, constant fatigue, headaches, difficulty sleeping, anxiety, emotional burnout, a body that feels heavy even after resting. The body often speaks the emotions the mouth refuses to say. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows when truth is ignored. And many calm people ignore their truth for years because they fear disappointing others. They fear becoming difficult. They fear losing love if they stop being emotionally available all the time. They fear what will happen if they finally admit they are tired. But healing begins the moment you realize something important. You are not required to destroy your inner peace just to maintain peace around others. That realization changes everything, because emotionally available people often confuse love with emotional sacrifice. They believe caring means carrying. They believe compassion means absorbing. They believe being good means never becoming a problem for anyone else. But true compassion includes yourself too. The Buddha never taught self-destruction in the name of kindness. He taught awareness, balance, wisdom, and the ending of suffering. And sometimes suffering continues because you keep abandoning yourself to protect everyone else from discomfort. There is also a painful reality many calm people eventually face. Some people become emotionally dependent on their calmness without ever truly caring for them in return. Not everyone who leans on you knows how to support you. Not everyone who finds comfort in your presence notices your exhaustion. And this does not always come from cruelty. Sometimes people simply become comfortable receiving without realizing how much you are giving. That is why boundaries are not selfish. They are necessary for emotional survival. Without boundaries, emotionally available people slowly become emotional containers for everyone else's pain, and containers eventually overflow. One of the most healing things a calm person can learn is that they are allowed to step back before breaking down. They are allowed to rest before collapsing. They are allowed to say, "I cannot carry this right now." That does not make you cold, it makes you human. Many people wait until burnout forces them to stop. But Buddhist wisdom encourages awareness before suffering becomes unbearable. It teaches you to notice imbalance early, to notice when compassion becomes exhaustion, to notice when emotional giving becomes emotional disappearance. Because the truth is, no human being can endlessly pour into others while remaining empty inside. Eventually, the soul begins asking for attention. Eventually, the quiet exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore. And maybe that is why you found yourself here tonight. Maybe part of you is finally tired of carrying emotional burdens in silence. Maybe part of you is finally ready to admit that always being calm has cost you more than people realize. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, you are beginning to understand that your peace matters too. And the painful part is that most calm people do not realize they are exhausted until their spirit begins quietly collapsing under the weight of emotional responsibility. For years, they convince themselves they are simply being loving, patient, mature, or understanding. But slowly, the role they created to protect others begins trapping them inside an emotional life where they no longer feel free to fully be themselves. There is a kind of loneliness that comes from constantly being emotionally controlled. A loneliness that does not come from being abandoned by others, but from abandoning parts of yourself for so long that you no longer know where your real emotions went. And this is where being the calm one slowly becomes something far more dangerous than exhaustion. It becomes a silent prison. Some prisons do not have walls. Some prisons are built from expectations. Expectations to always stay composed, expectations to always understand, expectations to always forgive quickly, expectations to always carry emotional weight without ever collapsing under it. Over time, people stop seeing you as a human being with limits and begin seeing you as emotional stability itself. And the frightening part is that eventually, you begin seeing yourself that way too. The moment you become known as the calm one, something subtle starts happening inside your relationships. People begin unconsciously assigning you a role. In every conflict, you are expected to be the mature one. In every emotional crisis, you are expected to remain steady. When someone else becomes emotional, angry, reactive, or overwhelmed, everyone looks toward you to balance the situation again. At first, this may feel empowering. You may even take pride in being emotionally grounded. There is beauty in emotional control. There is wisdom in calmness. Buddhist teachings deeply value inner stillness. But true inner peace is completely different from emotional imprisonment. Real peace is freedom. A prison is performance. And many calm people are not truly free emotionally anymore. They are performing emotional stability because they no longer feel safe showing anything else. This prison often forms quietly. No one sits you down and says, "From now on, you are no longer allowed to struggle." Instead, the role develops through repetition. Every time you suppress your emotions to protect others, every time you hide your pain to avoid becoming a burden, every time people praise you for handling things so well, every time someone says, "You're always so strong," slowly, your suffering becomes invisible, even to yourself. You begin feeling pressure to maintain the image of calmness because everyone around you depends on it. If you suddenly express anger, exhaustion, sadness, or emotional confusion, people become surprised, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes disappointed, because they unconsciously relied on your emotional steadiness to regulate themselves. And this creates a terrifying emotional trap. You begin fearing your own emotions, not because emotions are wrong, but because you are afraid of what will happen if people finally see that you are struggling too. So you keep smiling gently, keep listening, keep understanding, keep calming situations, keep carrying emotional tension in silence, and little by little, your calmness stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling like a mask you cannot remove. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment creates suffering. And one of the deepest attachments many emotionally mature people develop is attachment to identity. They become attached to being the calm one, the wise one, the patient one, the emotionally stable one. But every identity becomes painful when you feel trapped inside it. Because human beings are not one emotion. No person can remain endlessly calm without emotional consequences. Even the most peaceful soul experiences anger, grief, frustration, loneliness, and emotional fatigue. The difference is that emotionally imprisoned people no longer feel safe expressing those emotions openly. They suppress them until suppression becomes automatic. Many people who are trapped in this emotional role were praised for maturity very early in life. As children, they may have been called easy, responsible, or so understanding for their age. But often, what looked like maturity was actually emotional suppression born from necessity. Maybe they grew up in unstable households where expressing emotions caused conflict. Maybe they learned that staying quiet kept peace in the family. Maybe they became caretakers too early. Maybe they realized nobody was coming to emotionally protect them, so they learned to emotionally protect everyone else instead. Over time, calmness became survival, and survival patterns are very difficult to let go of because they once kept you emotionally safe. But the same pattern that protects you in one season of life can imprison you in another. The child who learned to stay emotionally controlled to survive family chaos may become the adult who feels guilty any time they express emotional needs. The teenager who became everyone's emotional support system may become the adult who feels responsible for fixing everyone's pain. The person praised for patience may become someone who tolerates emotional mistreatment far longer than they should. This is how emotional prisons form. Not through evil intentions, but through years of unconscious conditioning. And one of the saddest things about this prison is that from the outside, your life may still look emotionally healthy. People admire you, trust you, respect your calmness. They tell you how strong you are. They come to you for advice. You become the emotional anchor in relationships. But internally, something painful begins happening. You stop feeling emotionally seen. People see your strength, but not your struggle. They see your patience, but not your exhaustion. They see your calmness, but not the emotional pressure it takes to maintain it. Constantly, this creates a very specific kind of emotional isolation. You can be deeply loved and still feel emotionally alone because nobody truly understands how much you are holding inside. Sometimes calm people secretly wish someone would notice without them having to explain. They wish someone would ask deeper questions. They wish someone would say, "You always take care of everyone else, but who takes care of you?" But many calm people have become so emotionally self-contained that others assume they do not need support. And after years of playing the strong one, even asking for support can feel uncomfortable. Some emotionally imprisoned people feel guilty crying in front of others. Others apologize whenever they express emotional pain. Some laugh while talking about serious suffering because vulnerability feels unsafe to them. Their nervous system has been trained to believe emotional composure equals emotional safety. This is why being the calm one becomes dangerous over time. Not because calmness itself is harmful, but because emotional suppression slowly disconnects you from your authentic self. You begin editing your emotions before expressing them. You begin filtering your truth so nobody feels uncomfortable. You begin carrying emotional burdens silently because you no longer know how to let others see your full humanity. And eventually, your inner world becomes crowded with unspoken emotions. The anger you swallowed to avoid conflict. The sadness you minimized because others had it worse. The exhaustion you ignored because people depended on you. The resentment you felt guilty for feeling. The loneliness you never admitted. All of it remains inside. Buddhist teachings often describe suffering as accumulation, small emotional attachments, fears, suppressions, and unprocessed pain slowly gathering over time until the mind becomes heavy. This emotional prison is exactly that. Years of emotional self-silencing accumulating quietly beneath a calm surface, and the body always keeps score. Some calm people constantly feel physically tired even after sleeping. Others struggle with anxiety, headaches, emotional numbness, digestive problems, chest tightness, or chronic stress. Their body is carrying emotional tension their mouth refuses to release. The nervous system was never designed to remain emotionally guarded forever. One painful reality about emotional prisons is that other people often benefit from your self-suppression. Not intentionally, but practically. When you always stay calm, others avoid accountability for their emotional behavior. When you absorb tension quietly, others do not have to face discomfort. When you forgive immediately, others never fully confront the consequences of hurting you. Your calmness can accidentally become permission for emotional imbalance in relationships. This is why some calm people attract emotionally immature individuals repeatedly. Emotionally careless people often feel safest around emotionally responsible people because they know someone else will stabilize the relationship. And over time, this becomes exhausting. You become the emotional regulator in every room, the emotional translator in every conflict, the emotional healer in every relationship. Meanwhile, your own emotional wounds remain untouched because you are too busy managing everyone else's emotions. The prison deepens when you begin believing this is simply who you are. You tell yourself, "I'm just naturally calm," but deep down, part of you may not even remember what emotional freedom feels like anymore. Freedom means being able to express hurt without shame. Freedom means being able to say no without guilt. Freedom means allowing yourself to disappoint people sometimes. Freedom means understanding that your value does not come from emotional self-sacrifice. Many calm people secretly fear becoming emotionally honest because honesty threatens the identity they built. If they finally admit they are overwhelmed, angry, lonely, or tired, they fear people may see them differently. But healing requires truth. Buddhist wisdom never teaches emotional performance. It teaches awareness. Awareness means seeing reality clearly. And reality becomes distorted the moment you begin suppressing your inner truth to maintain external harmony. Because external peace without internal honesty is not peace. It is emotional imprisonment disguised as maturity. There are people who have spent decades carrying emotional burdens silently because they thought that was what love required. They believed love meant endless patience, endless understanding, endless emotional endurance, but healthy compassion includes limits. Even Buddhist monks retreat into silence to restore themselves. Even spiritual teachers understand the importance of detachment, rest, and boundaries. Compassion was never meant to become emotional slavery, and one of the hardest things for calm people to accept is this: some people may become uncomfortable when you stop over-carrying emotional weight for them. When you begin setting boundaries, certain people may accuse you of changing. When you stop absorbing endless emotional chaos calmly, some may call you cold. When you finally express exhaustion honestly, some may act surprised because they became too comfortable with your emotional labor. But discomfort is not cruelty. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to stop performing emotional stability every second of your life. You are allowed to have emotions too. And perhaps one of the most healing realizations is understanding that calmness should come from inner freedom, not emotional fear. There is a massive difference between someone who is peaceful because they are emotionally healthy and someone who is quiet because they are afraid of emotional conflict. One is rooted in wisdom, the other is rooted in survival. Many people confuse emotional suppression with spiritual maturity. But true Buddhist wisdom does not teach emotional denial. It teaches mindful awareness of emotions without becoming controlled by them. That means you are allowed to acknowledge anger without becoming consumed by it. You are allowed to acknowledge sadness without shame. You are allowed to acknowledge emotional exhaustion without guilt. The prison begins breaking the moment you stop treating your own emotions like inconveniences. And for many calm people, this realization feels both liberating and terrifying. Because once you finally stop performing emotional perfection, you begin meeting the parts of yourself you abandoned long ago. The tired part, the grieving part, the angry part, the lonely part, the human part. And strangely, this is where true peace finally begins, not in pretending you are endlessly calm, not in endlessly carrying others, not in endlessly suppressing yourself, but in finally allowing yourself to exist as a complete human being instead of an emotional role everyone else assigned to you. Because you were never born to become an emotional prison for other people's comfort. You were born to live in peace too, and maybe that is the moment many calm people finally begin to wake up. The moment they realize they have spent years confusing emotional self-sacrifice with love. Years believing that carrying everyone else's pain made them compassionate. Years believing that constantly rescuing, fixing, understanding, and emotionally absorbing others was proof of kindness. But slowly, a deeper question begins rising inside them. What if compassion was never meant to destroy you in the process? There is a painful kind of exhaustion that comes from caring too much in the wrong way. Not because love itself is harmful, but because somewhere along the journey, compassion quietly turned into emotional over-responsibility. And many people never notice the difference until their spirit becomes too heavy to carry anymore. Some people spend their entire lives believing they are compassionate when, in reality, they are emotionally over-attached to other people's suffering. They feel responsible for everyone's happiness, responsible for everyone's healing, responsible for everyone's emotional state. If someone is sad, they immediately feel pressure to fix it. If someone is struggling, they begin carrying the burden internally as if it belongs to them too. If someone is angry, distant, or emotionally unstable, they absorb the tension into their own nervous system. This is where compassion slowly becomes unhealthy. Because true Buddhist compassion is rooted in wisdom, not emotional drowning. One of the deepest misunderstandings many emotionally sensitive people have is believing that love means carrying pain for others. But Buddhism teaches something very different. Compassion does not mean becoming emotionally consumed by another person's suffering. Compassion means being present with suffering without losing yourself inside it. That difference changes everything. Emotional over-responsibility says, I must fix this person or I will feel guilty. Compassion says, I care about this person deeply, but their healing is not fully in my control. Emotional over-responsibility says, if they are hurting, I must carry it too. Compassion says, I can support them without emotionally collapsing beside them. One creates peace, the other creates burnout. Many calm people struggle to understand this because they were taught that good people sacrifice endlessly. They were praised for always helping, always listening, always understanding, and over time they developed an unconscious belief that other people's emotional comfort mattered more than their own emotional well-being. This belief often feels noble at first. It makes you feel needed, important, loving. But slowly, it creates emotional imbalance because you begin abandoning yourself every time someone else suffers. And suffering never ends completely in human life. There will always be another problem, another emotional crisis, another person who needs support, another situation pulling on your heart. If your nervous system reacts to every emotional struggle around you as if it is your personal responsibility, eventually your inner world becomes overloaded. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment is one of the roots of suffering, and emotional over-responsibility is often attachment disguised as compassion. It is attachment to controlling outcomes, attachment to being needed, attachment to preventing discomfort, attachment to saving people from pain they may need to experience themselves. This is very difficult for emotionally caring people to accept because they genuinely want to help. But Buddhism understands something many people forget. Pain is part of human awakening. Some lessons can only be learned through direct experience. Some growth only happens through discomfort. Some healing cannot be forced from the outside. Yet emotionally over-responsible people often try to protect everyone from emotional pain, even when that pain is part of necessary growth. They interrupt people's lessons without realizing it. They rescue too quickly. They absorb too much. They carry emotional burdens that were never truly theirs. And in doing so, they slowly lose connection with their own emotional center. One reason emotional over-responsibility becomes so dangerous is because it creates chronic emotional hypervigilance. Your mind becomes constantly focused on monitoring other people's emotional states. You become deeply sensitive to moods, reactions, silence, tension, disappointment, sadness, or emotional withdrawal. You begin living emotionally outward instead of inward. Your inner peace becomes dependent on how everyone else is feeling. If others are okay, you feel calm. If others are upset, you feel internally unsafe. This is not compassion. This is emotional enmeshment. Buddhist compassion is grounded, stable, aware. It does not panic every time suffering appears. It does not lose itself in emotional chaos. Real compassion can sit beside pain without becoming consumed by it. The Buddha himself encountered suffering constantly. Sick people, grieving people, dying people, lost people. But he did not absorb every person's suffering into his nervous system. He responded with wisdom, presence, and clarity. This is where many emotionally burdened people become trapped. They confuse emotional absorption with love. But absorbing suffering does not heal suffering. Sometimes it simply creates two exhausted people instead of one. There is also another painful truth hidden inside emotional over-responsibility. Many people unconsciously use it to maintain emotional control in relationships. They believe if they can keep everyone emotionally stable, then relationships will remain safe. This often begins in childhood. A child growing up around emotional instability may learn to become the peacemaker. They monitor moods constantly. They try to calm tension before conflict begins. They become emotionally responsible far too early. Over time, they carry this survival strategy into adulthood. Now they feel anxious anytime someone around them is emotionally uncomfortable. They rush to fix misunderstandings. They over-explain themselves. They apologize excessively. They absorb blame to restore peace quickly. They become emotionally exhausted trying to prevent emotional disconnection. But relationships built on emotional self-sacrifice are not emotionally balanced relationships. One of the hardest lessons Buddhist wisdom teaches is that you cannot control the emotional journey of another person. You cannot force healing. You cannot force self-awareness. You cannot force emotional maturity. And trying to carry responsibility for another person's emotional state will slowly destroy your own peace. This does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. That is another misunderstanding. Some people hear the idea of detachment and think Buddhism teaches emotional distance. It does not. Buddhism teaches compassionate presence without emotional possession. You can love deeply without making another person's suffering your personal identity. You can care without drowning. You can support without carrying. You can listen without absorbing. This is especially important because emotionally over-responsible people often attract emotionally dependent individuals. Not always intentionally, but energetically. Emotionally unstable people often feel safe around people who constantly regulate emotional environments. And over time, the calm person becomes the emotional caretaker in every relationship. They become the therapist friend, the emotionally stable partner, the family mediator, the listener everyone depends on. And while this may look admirable from the outside, internally it becomes exhausting because their own emotional needs rarely receive equal care. Sometimes they secretly wish someone would emotionally hold them the way they hold everyone else. But because they appear so emotionally strong, people assume they do not need support. This creates quiet emotional grief. The grief of being deeply needed but rarely deeply cared for. The grief of always understanding others while nobody fully understands you. The grief of constantly carrying emotional weight while pretending it feels natural. Over time, emotionally over-responsible people also begin losing emotional boundaries. They struggle separating their emotions from other people's emotions. Someone else's anxiety becomes their anxiety. Someone else's sadness becomes their sadness. Someone else's emotional instability controls the atmosphere inside their own body. This creates deep nervous system exhaustion because the mind never fully rests. You begin carrying emotional energy that does not belong to you. Buddhist teachings emphasize awareness, partly because awareness allows separation. You begin noticing, this emotion belongs to them, not to me. That awareness protects inner peace. Without it, emotionally sensitive people unconsciously absorb emotional suffering from every direction, and eventually they begin collapsing internally under emotional weight they were never meant to carry. Many emotionally over-responsible people also struggle with guilt whenever they prioritize themselves. Rest feels selfish, boundaries feel cruel, saying no feels uncomfortable. They feel responsible for maintaining emotional harmony even at their own expense. But true compassion includes yourself too. This is something many people resist because they fear becoming selfish. But Buddhism never teaches self-erasure. It teaches balance, the middle way, not emotional coldness, not emotional martyrdom, balance. A person drowning emotionally cannot sustainably help others. A soul that never rests eventually becomes bitter. A nervous system constantly overloaded with emotional responsibility eventually breaks down. That is why compassionate wisdom requires limits. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is stop interfering with another person's emotional process. Not because you do not care, but because growth often requires direct experience. Emotional over-responsible people struggle deeply with this because watching others suffer makes them uncomfortable internally. But discomfort is part of life. Buddhist wisdom does not teach the elimination of all pain. It teaches a wiser relationship with pain. There is also a profound difference between empathy and emotional fusion. Empathy allows you to understand someone's pain while remaining emotionally centered. Emotional fusion causes you to lose your center completely inside another person's suffering. One keeps your spirit grounded. The other slowly drains your life force. Many emotionally exhausted people were never taught this distinction. They believed the more pain they carried for others, the more loving they were. But love measured by self-destruction is not healthy love. One painful sign of emotional over-responsibility is constantly feeling emotionally on call. Even during moments of rest, your nervous system remains alert for emotional emergencies. You check your phone anxiously. You worry about everyone's feelings. You mentally rehearse conversations. You feel responsible for fixing emotional tension immediately. This creates internal pressure that never fully relaxes, and the body eventually responds. Fatigue, anxiety, emotional numbness, sleep problems, burnout, mood swings, overthinking, emotional heaviness. The body speaks what the soul has been carrying silently. Buddhist monks often practice stillness and silence, not because they reject the world, but because they understand something modern life constantly ignores. The human mind needs spaciousness. It needs moments free from emotional entanglement, free from carrying everyone else's suffering constantly. Without spaciousness, compassion turns into emotional suffocation. This is why emotionally over-responsible people often feel strangely disconnected from themselves. They know everyone else's emotions deeply, but no longer understand their own needs clearly. Their emotional energy flows outward constantly, leaving very little awareness directed inward. And eventually, they reach a painful moment where they quietly ask themselves, Who am I when I'm not taking care of everyone else emotionally? That question can feel terrifying because emotional caretaking became their identity. But healing begins there. Healing begins when you stop believing your worth depends on emotional sacrifice. Healing begins when you understand that someone else's pain is not always your responsibility to solve. Healing begins when compassion becomes rooted in wisdom instead of fear, because many emotionally over-responsible people are not helping from peace. They are helping from fear, fear of disappointing others, fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen as selfish. But compassionate wisdom is not driven by fear. It is driven by clarity. Clarity understands this truth deeply. You can love someone without carrying their entire emotional world on your shoulders. You can support people without abandoning yourself. You can care deeply while still protecting your nervous system. You can sit beside suffering without drowning inside it. And perhaps this is one of the most freeing lessons Buddhist wisdom offers emotionally exhausted people. You were never meant to become responsible for saving everyone. You are not the emotional guardian of the entire world. You are a human being too, a human being who deserves rest, a human being who deserves emotional balance, a human being whose inner peace matters just as much as anyone else's. And the moment you finally understand the difference between compassion and emotional over-responsibility, something inside you begins breathing again for the first time in years. And perhaps that is why so many emotionally exhausted people eventually reach a strange and painful realization. After spending years carrying everyone else's emotions, they suddenly no longer know what they themselves truly feel. They can sense sadness in others immediately. They can detect emotional tension in seconds. They can understand pain before people even explain it. But when they sit alone with themselves, there is often confusion, numbness, emptiness, or silence. Because somewhere along the way, while trying to hold everyone else together, they slowly lost contact with their own emotional world. There is a quiet sadness that comes from no longer recognizing your own inner voice. A sadness that forms when your attention has been focused outward for so long that your own needs become distant, blurry, and difficult to hear. And this happens far more often than people realize. Some people become so skilled at carrying other people's pain that they stop noticing their own pain completely. At first, this may not seem dangerous. In fact, it can even feel meaningful. You become the listener, the comforter, the calm presence others run to during difficult moments. People trust you with their emotions because you know how to hold space without judgment. You become emotionally useful to the people around you. But slowly, your own emotional life begins fading into the background. Every time someone comes to you hurting, your attention shifts toward them. Their sadness becomes more important than your exhaustion. Their crisis becomes louder than your inner needs. Their emotional pain takes priority over your own unspoken wounds. And because you genuinely care, you convince yourself this is simply kindness. But over time, something painful begins happening inside you. You stop asking yourself important questions. What am I feeling right now? What do I need emotionally? What has been hurting me lately? What have I been suppressing? You become so focused on understanding everyone else that you stop understanding yourself. Buddhist wisdom teaches that awareness is essential because suffering grows in darkness. What remains unseen inside the mind eventually shapes your entire emotional reality, and many emotionally burdened people spend years deeply aware of everyone else's emotional states while remaining disconnected from their own. This creates emotional imbalance that slowly becomes dangerous. Some people know exactly how to comfort others during heartbreak, but cannot comfort themselves. Some know how to help others process grief, but never allow themselves to grieve fully. Some know how to calm everyone else's anxiety while secretly living with constant inner tension. And because they appear emotionally composed, nobody realizes how disconnected they have become from themselves. One reason this happens is because carrying other people's pain creates emotional distraction. Focusing on other people's suffering allows you to avoid sitting with your own emotional truth. As long as someone else needs you, you can postpone facing yourself. This becomes especially common for people who grew up believing their emotional needs were less important than the needs of others. Maybe they were taught not to cry too much. Maybe they learned to stay strong for the family. Maybe they became emotional caretakers very young. Maybe their own feelings were ignored, minimized, or treated like burdens. Over time, they unconsciously learned something painful. Other people's emotions matter more than mine. And once that belief settles deeply into the nervous system, self-abandonment begins feeling normal. Many emotionally caring people do not even notice how disconnected they are from themselves because they are constantly emotionally occupied. Their mind is filled with everyone else's problems, moods, pain, relationships, fears, and struggles. Their emotional energy flows outward all day long. They listen, they comfort, they reassure, they explain, they calm tension. They emotionally support everyone around them, but almost nobody asks them to slow down and reconnect with themselves. And even when they are alone, silence can feel uncomfortable because buried emotions begin rising the moment external distractions disappear. This is why some emotionally overburdened people constantly stay busy. Busyness protects them from emotional confrontation with themselves. As long as they are helping others, solving problems, or managing emotional situations, they do not have to sit quietly with their own inner emptiness. But buried emotions never disappear permanently. They wait, and eventually they begin showing themselves through exhaustion, numbness, anxiety, irritability, emotional breakdowns, or quiet sadness that seems to appear for no clear reason. The body often notices emotional disconnection before the mind does. Buddhist teachings speak deeply about mindfulness because mindfulness reconnects you to direct experience. It pulls your awareness back into your own body, breath, emotions, and inner state. Without mindfulness, emotionally burdened people drift further and further away from themselves while trying to emotionally carry everyone else. And one of the saddest things about this disconnection is that some people become strangers to their own emotions. When asked what they need, they do not know. When asked what they feel, they struggle to answer clearly. When asked what would truly make them happy, there is confusion. Because their emotional identity became built around caring for others instead of knowing themselves. Some people have spent so much time reading other people's emotions that they forgot how to read their own heart. And this creates deep internal loneliness. Not just loneliness from lack of connection with others, but loneliness from lack of connection with yourself. There are people who spend years being emotionally available for everyone else, while secretly feeling emotionally abandoned inside. Not because nobody loves them, but because they have stopped emotionally showing up for themselves. They silence their own pain too quickly. They invalidate their own exhaustion. They minimize their own sadness. They tell themselves, other people have it worse. But pain ignored is still pain. Buddhist wisdom never teaches people to deny suffering. It teaches people to become aware of suffering with honesty and compassion. Yet emotionally burdened people often offer compassion to everyone except themselves. This is where emotional self-loss quietly deepens. Many people who carry others emotionally also become disconnected from their own intuition. Their decisions become shaped by external emotional pressure instead of inner clarity. They focus so much on making others comfortable that they stop asking whether situations are emotionally healthy for them personally. They tolerate relationships that drain them. They stay in emotionally one-sided dynamics too long. They ignore inner discomfort repeatedly. And every time they betray their inner truth to maintain emotional harmony, They lose another small piece of connection with themselves. Over time, this creates emotional numbness, not because they are cold people, but because constant emotional overload forces the mind to shut down certain feelings for survival. Joy becomes muted, excitement fades, rest no longer feels fully restful, life begins feeling emotionally foggy. Some people describe this feeling as existing instead of living. They move through life supporting everyone else while secretly feeling disconnected from their own aliveness. This is one of the hidden costs of emotional absorption. When your inner world becomes overcrowded with other people's emotions, there is less space left to experience yourself clearly. And the tragedy is that many emotionally burdened people mistake this numbness for maturity. They say things like, "I'm just calm," or "nothing really affects me anymore." But deep down, they are emotionally exhausted. Their spirit became tired from carrying too much for too long. There is also another painful pattern that develops when you constantly carry other people's pain. You begin feeling guilty any time you prioritize yourself emotionally. Rest feels selfish. Solitude feels irresponsible. Boundaries feel uncomfortable because your identity became tied to emotional availability. So even when your soul desperately needs space, you continue giving, continue listening, continue carrying, continue absorbing. And slowly, your inner world grows quieter and quieter until eventually you cannot hear your own emotional needs anymore. This is why many emotionally burdened people suddenly break down unexpectedly after years of appearing strong. The collapse seems sudden from the outside, but internally it has been building quietly for years. Suppressed exhaustion eventually demands attention. Unprocessed grief eventually surfaces. Ignored emotional needs eventually become impossible to silence. The human soul can only survive self-abandonment for so long before it begins crying out for reconnection. Buddhist teachings often describe suffering as disconnection from reality. And one painful reality emotionally burdened people avoid is this: they are suffering too, not just others, them too. But many caring people struggle deeply to admit this because they have become emotionally conditioned to focus outward. They feel selfish, acknowledging their own emotional wounds when others are hurting around them. Yet healing cannot begin until you include yourself in your own compassion. You matter too. Your emotions matter too. Your exhaustion matters too. Your inner peace matters too. This realization sounds simple, but for emotionally self-sacrificing people, it can feel revolutionary. Because many of them secretly believe their role is to carry, not to receive, to support, not to need support, to understand, not to be understood, to comfort, not to be comforted. And over time, these beliefs create emotional starvation inside the soul. One of the most healing things Buddhist wisdom offers is the reminder that awareness must include yourself too. Mindfulness is not only awareness of external suffering, it is awareness of your own body, your own emotions, your own suffering, your own limits. Without self-awareness, compassion becomes self-destruction. This is why emotionally healthy compassion requires emotional boundaries. Boundaries are not walls against love. They are protection against emotional disappearance. They allow you to remain connected to yourself while still caring for others. Without boundaries, emotionally sensitive people often become emotional mirrors. They absorb the feelings of everyone around them until they can no longer separate their own emotions from external emotional energy. And this creates chronic confusion inside the nervous system. You begin feeling heavy without knowing why, drained without understanding why, emotionally overwhelmed even when your own life seems stable, because your body is carrying emotional weight that does not belong entirely to you. Many people do not realize how deeply this affects the nervous system. Constant emotional absorption keeps the body in a state of subtle tension. You become emotionally alert all the time, hyper-aware of conflict, hyper-aware of moods, hyper-aware of emotional shifts. This chronic emotional vigilance slowly disconnects you from rest, stillness, and inner clarity, and eventually you forget what emotional lightness even feels like. But healing begins the moment you pause long enough to listen inward again, not outward, inward. Healing begins when you stop treating your own emotions like interruptions. Healing begins when you stop measuring your worth by how much pain you can carry for others. Healing begins when you finally ask yourself, what have I been needing all this time? For some people, the answer is rest. For others, safety. For others, emotional honesty. For others, permission to stop being strong every second. And perhaps one of the most powerful moments in emotional healing is realizing that you do not have to disappear inside other people's pain to prove you care. You are allowed to remain connected to yourself. You are allowed to protect your emotional center. You are allowed to notice your own suffering too. Because the truth is, if you spend your whole life carrying everyone else emotionally while abandoning yourself internally, eventually you will wake up feeling deeply disconnected from your own soul. And no amount of helping others can heal the pain of losing yourself. And perhaps that is the deepest tragedy of all. Many people spend years becoming experts at carrying emotional pain for others while remaining completely disconnected from their own inner world. They become emotionally useful to everyone around them, yet emotionally unfamiliar to themselves. And somewhere inside that exhaustion, another painful realization slowly begins to appear. Just because you know how to keep peace around you does not mean you feel peace within you. Some people spend their entire lives trying to prevent conflict, calm emotions, fix misunderstandings, and maintain harmony in every relationship around them. They become the peacemakers in their families, friendships, marriages, and workplaces. Everyone sees them as calm, stable, mature, and emotionally wise. But beneath that calm surface, many of them are carrying constant anxiety, tension, emotional suppression, and silent exhaustion. Because peacekeeping and inner peace are not the same thing. One is about controlling external emotional environments. The other is about freedom inside your own spirit. And many emotionally burdened people confuse the two for years. There is a kind of calmness that is not peace at all. It is emotional survival. It is silence used to avoid rejection. Patience used to prevent conflict. Smiling used to maintain harmony. Agreeing used to stop emotional tension from growing. From the outside, it may look peaceful, but internally, the nervous system is constantly afraid of emotional disruption. This is not true peace. True peace does not require constant self-suppression. Many people became peacekeepers because they learned very early that conflict felt emotionally unsafe. Maybe they grew up in homes where anger created fear. Maybe tension in the family felt unbearable. Maybe they watched relationships collapse under emotional chaos. So they unconsciously decided, I will become the calm one. I will keep everything emotionally stable. At first, this survival strategy protects them. They learn how to read moods quickly. They become emotionally careful. They avoid saying things that may upset others. They smooth over tension before arguments grow. They become emotionally responsible for the atmosphere around them. And because this behavior often makes relationships appear calmer externally, people praise them for it. You're so mature. You're always peaceful. You never cause problems. But what nobody sees is the emotional cost of constantly managing other people's emotional comfort. Because peacekeeping often requires suppressing your authentic feelings. You swallow frustration to avoid conflict. You stay quiet when something hurts you. You avoid difficult conversations because tension feels emotionally dangerous. You apologize too quickly just to restore harmony. You over-explain yourself so nobody becomes upset. You become more focused on maintaining emotional stability around others than protecting emotional honesty within yourself. And over time, this creates deep internal conflict. Your outer world may look calm, while your inner world becomes increasingly tense. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows whenever reality is resisted or hidden. And peacekeepers often hide their true emotional experience to maintain external harmony. They may look composed on the outside, while internally carrying resentment, anxiety, sadness, emotional fatigue, or loneliness. This is why so many calm people secretly feel exhausted even when there is no drama in their lives. Because keeping peace externally can still require enormous emotional labor internally. Some people spend entire conversations monitoring emotional reactions instead of speaking honestly. They become hyper-aware of tone changes, facial expressions, body language, and emotional shifts. Their nervous system constantly scans for signs of tension because conflict feels unsafe deep inside them. This creates chronic emotional vigilance. Even during calm moments, the body remains emotionally alert, and eventually the nervous system forgets how to fully relax. True inner peace feels completely different. Inner peace is not the absence of conflict around you. It is the absence of war within you. A person with true inner peace does not need to constantly manage everyone else's emotions to feel safe. They can tolerate discomfort. They can survive disagreement. They can allow emotional honesty without collapsing internally. Peacekeepers often cannot, not because they are weak, but because their nervous system became conditioned to associate emotional tension with danger. This is why many peacekeepers secretly fear disappointing people. The moment someone becomes upset with them, their body reacts intensely. Anxiety rises, guilt appears, overthinking begins. They replay conversations repeatedly, searching for ways to restore emotional balance. Their peace depends too heavily on external approval. And external peace is fragile because human beings are emotional creatures. Conflict, misunderstandings, disappointment, and emotional discomfort are unavoidable parts of life. If your emotional stability depends entirely on everyone around you remaining emotionally satisfied, your nervous system will never fully rest. Buddhist teachings speak deeply about attachment because attachment creates instability. Peacekeepers often become deeply attached to harmony itself. They fear emotional disruption so much that they sacrifice truth to maintain comfort. But truth suppressed eventually becomes suffering. Many people who constantly keep peace secretly feel emotionally invisible because they rarely reveal their real feelings. Others only know the emotionally controlled version of them, the agreeable version, the understanding version, the emotionally stable version. Meanwhile, their deeper emotions remain hidden beneath layers of self-control. Over time, this creates emotional loneliness because real connection requires honesty. If people only know your calm mask, they do not truly know you completely. Some peacekeepers become so skilled at managing emotional environments that they no longer even recognize how much fear is driving their behavior. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of emotional tension, fear of being misunderstood, fear of becoming the problem. And because these fears remain hidden beneath politeness and calmness, they often go unnoticed for years. Buddhist wisdom encourages awareness because unconscious fear quietly controls behavior until it is fully seen. The moment you begin honestly asking yourself, "Why am I always trying to keep peace?" deeper truths begin surfacing. Sometimes the answer is love, but sometimes the answer is fear. And there is a huge difference between peacefulness rooted in wisdom and peacefulness rooted in emotional self-protection. One brings freedom, the other creates emotional imprisonment. Many peacekeepers also become emotionally disconnected from anger, not because they never feel anger, but because they fear expressing it. They associate anger with danger, conflict, rejection, or emotional instability. So instead of acknowledging anger honestly, they suppress it. But suppressed anger does not disappear. It transforms, sometimes into resentment, sometimes into anxiety, sometimes into emotional numbness, sometimes into physical exhaustion. The body stores what the mouth refuses to say. This is why some peacekeepers suddenly experience emotional breakdowns after years of appearing calm. People around them become shocked because they never saw the hidden emotional pressure building beneath the surface. But emotional suppression always has consequences eventually. True inner peace does not mean never feeling anger, sadness, frustration, or emotional discomfort. It means having a healthy relationship with those emotions instead of fearing them. The Buddha himself never taught emotional avoidance. He taught mindful awareness. Awareness allows you to observe emotions honestly without becoming controlled by them. But peacekeepers often skip awareness completely and move straight into suppression. Instead of asking, "What am I truly feeling right now?" they ask, "How do I keep everyone comfortable?" And this creates self-abandonment disguised as maturity. One painful sign of emotional peacekeeping is constantly feeling responsible for other people's reactions. If someone is disappointed, you immediately feel guilty. If someone becomes upset, you blame yourself automatically. If tension appears in relationships, your mind instantly starts searching for ways to repair everything, even when you are not truly responsible for the problem. This emotional pattern becomes exhausting because human emotions cannot be controlled perfectly. People will misunderstand you sometimes. People will become disappointed sometimes. People will project their pain onto you sometimes. People will experience emotions you cannot fix. Inner peace begins when you stop believing every emotional disturbance around you is your responsibility to solve. That realization can feel terrifying for chronic peacekeepers because emotional stability became part of their identity. They became the person who smooths things over, the emotionally safe person, the understanding one. But constantly protecting everyone else from discomfort slowly destroys your own emotional freedom. Buddhist wisdom teaches non-attachment, partly because attachment to emotional control creates suffering. Peacekeepers often become attached to emotional predictability. They feel safest when everyone around them feels okay. But life is unpredictable. Relationships are unpredictable. Human emotions are unpredictable. Trying to maintain constant emotional harmony in every situation becomes impossible. And when peacekeepers fail to maintain harmony, they often feel like they failed as people. This is why so many emotionally calm individuals secretly struggle with anxiety. Their nervous system constantly works overtime trying to maintain emotional balance in relationships, conversations, environments, and family systems. Even during rest, part of the mind remains emotionally alert, watching, monitoring, preparing, trying to prevent emotional disruption before it happens. But true inner peace does not require constant emotional management. Inner peace allows uncertainty. Inner peace allows honesty. Inner peace allows emotional discomfort without panic. One of the deepest shifts that happens during healing is realizing that conflict itself is not always dangerous. Sometimes conflict is honesty finally entering a relationship. Sometimes discomfort is necessary for growth. Sometimes tension appears because truth is finally being spoken instead of endlessly suppressed. Peacekeepers often avoid necessary emotional conversations because they fear temporary discomfort more than long-term emotional disconnection. So they remain silent. They tolerate behavior that hurts them. They suppress emotional needs. They avoid confrontation, and slowly, resentment grows beneath the calm exterior. This resentment can become especially painful because peacekeepers often feel guilty for feeling it. They think, "I'm supposed to be patient, understanding, calm." So instead of acknowledging resentment honestly, they bury it deeper. But buried emotions always shape the nervous system eventually. This is why some calm people secretly feel emotionally tired around others, even when nothing dramatic is happening. Their body has spent years suppressing truth to maintain harmony. That level of emotional self-control requires enormous energy, and eventually the soul becomes exhausted from constantly performing emotional stability. True peace feels lighter. True peace does not require pretending. True peace does not require abandoning your emotional truth. True peace allows authenticity without shame. There is also a profound difference between emotional stillness and emotional shutdown. Peacekeepers often appear calm externally because they learn to disconnect from emotional expression, but numbness is not peace. Silence is not always serenity. Sometimes silence is simply fear wearing soft clothing. Buddhist teachings emphasize compassion toward yourself, because inner peace cannot grow in a mind constantly abandoning its own truth. Self-compassion means acknowledging your own emotional experience with honesty instead of constantly prioritizing external harmony. This can feel deeply uncomfortable at first, especially for people who built their identity around being easygoing, emotionally stable, and low maintenance. But healing requires emotional truth. You cannot build genuine peace on top of self-suppression. And perhaps one of the most powerful moments in emotional healing is realizing this. You are allowed to disappoint people sometimes without becoming a bad person. You are allowed to disagree. You are allowed to express hurt. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to stop carrying responsibility for everyone else's emotional comfort. Because peacekeeping may protect temporary harmony, but inner peace protects your soul, and the two are not the same thing at all. And maybe that is the moment many calm people finally begin understanding something painful. Keeping peace around everyone else often came at the cost of abandoning themselves. They stayed quiet to avoid tension. They stayed patient to avoid disappointing others. They stayed emotionally available even when they were exhausted. And for a long time, they convinced themselves this was kindness, maturity, or love. But eventually, something heavy begins growing quietly beneath all that emotional self-control. Not anger that explodes loudly, not bitterness that openly attacks others, but a quiet resentment that slowly forms in the deepest corners of the heart when your needs are always postponed. There is a sadness that develops when you become the person who always understands everyone else while nobody truly understands you. A sadness that does not arrive suddenly, but slowly settles into the soul after years of emotional self-neglect. And the frightening part is that many kind people do not even realize resentment is growing inside them because it hides beneath politeness, patience, and emotional responsibility. Some people believe resentment only belongs to angry or selfish people. But in reality, resentment often grows strongest inside those who constantly sacrifice themselves emotionally while pretending it costs them nothing. Every time you ignore your own exhaustion to emotionally support someone else, a small emotional wound forms. Every time you silence your own needs to keep others comfortable, another small wound forms. Every time you say, "it's okay," when something actually hurts you, your inner world absorbs another layer of pain. And at first, you barely notice it. Because emotionally giving people are used to postponing themselves. They tell themselves, "this is not the right time to talk about my feelings. They're struggling more than I am. I'll deal with my emotions later." But later keeps getting postponed. Days become months, months become years. And eventually, the soul begins asking a painful question. When will it finally be my turn to matter too? This is where resentment quietly begins growing. Not because you stopped loving people, but because deep inside, part of you feels emotionally abandoned. Many emotionally burdened people carry resentment they feel ashamed to admit. They feel guilty for feeling emotionally drained by people they genuinely care about. They think, "I should be more compassionate, more patient, more understanding." So instead of acknowledging resentment honestly, they suppress it. But suppressed resentment does not disappear. It changes form. Sometimes it becomes emotional numbness, sometimes quiet irritation, sometimes exhaustion, sometimes emotional distance, sometimes secret fantasies of disappearing from everyone for a while just to finally breathe. There are people who spend years being emotionally available for others while secretly feeling invisible inside. They answer everyone's calls, listen to everyone's pain, show up for everyone emotionally, but when they themselves need comfort, support, or understanding, they often receive far less than they give. This imbalance slowly breaks something inside the spirit. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment and imbalance create suffering, and constantly postponing your own emotional needs creates deep internal imbalance. Human beings cannot endlessly give emotional energy while receiving little care in return without emotional consequences. The soul eventually notices the neglect. One of the reasons this resentment stays quiet for so long is because emotionally caring people often fear becoming selfish. They have spent years building an identity around being patient, helpful, calm, and emotionally dependable. Admitting that they feel resentful threatens the image they built of themselves, so they continue smiling, continue helping, continue carrying emotional weight silently, even while exhaustion quietly grows inside them. And what makes this especially painful is that many people around them may never realize anything is wrong. From the outside, the emotionally responsible person still looks kind, composed, and reliable. Nobody sees the emotional fatigue hiding beneath the calmness. Nobody sees how tired they are of always being the one who understands. Nobody sees how deeply they wish someone would finally notice their needs without them having to beg for attention. Nobody sees the silent grief of always putting yourself second. There is also a dangerous emotional pattern that develops when your needs are constantly postponed. You slowly begin disconnecting from your own desires entirely. Because your emotional energy is always focused outward, you stop asking yourself important questions. What do I need emotionally right now? What am I missing in my life? What has been hurting me? What do I secretly wish people understood about me? Over time, your emotional identity becomes built around caring for others instead of caring for yourself. This creates emotional starvation, and emotional starvation eventually creates resentment, not because you are ungrateful, not because you are cruel, but because the human heart cannot survive endless emotional neglect without pain. Many emotionally self-sacrificing people secretly hope others will eventually notice how much they give and naturally return that same level of care. But this often does not happen automatically. Not because people are evil, but because humans adapt quickly to what is consistently available. If you always suppress your needs quietly, people may assume you do not have many needs. If you always appear emotionally stable, people may assume you rarely struggle. If you always give without asking for support, people may assume you are fine carrying everything alone. This creates one of the deepest emotional wounds calm people experience. The pain of being deeply needed, but rarely deeply cared for. And over time, this imbalance creates quiet emotional anger. Not explosive anger, but the kind that sits silently in the chest. The kind that makes you feel emotionally tired around people you once loved helping. The kind that makes simple conversations feel draining. The kind that makes you secretly crave isolation, because being around people feels emotionally demanding. This is often the soul's way of saying, I cannot keep abandoning myself like this. Buddhist teachings emphasize awareness because many forms of suffering begin unconsciously. Resentment rarely appears overnight. It grows through repeated self-betrayal, through repeatedly choosing everyone else's emotional comfort over your own emotional truth. Some people become so used to postponing themselves that they no longer even recognize their own resentment clearly. Instead, it appears indirectly. They become emotionally detached, less patient, more easily irritated, quietly withdrawn, emotionally exhausted by conversations, overwhelmed by small requests. Not because they suddenly became cold people, but because their emotional reserves are depleted. The body and mind eventually resist constant emotional giving without nourishment. This resentment becomes especially confusing for kind people because they genuinely love the people they feel drained by. They do not want to resent them. They want to continue being caring, compassionate, and supportive. But true compassion cannot survive endless self-neglect. Even Buddhist teachings emphasize balance. The middle way. Not emotional selfishness, not emotional martyrdom, balance. And many emotionally burdened people live far outside balance. They become emotional caretakers for everyone while leaving their own inner world emotionally unattended. Over time, this creates internal contradiction. Part of them wants to keep giving because they care deeply. Another part desperately wants rest, space, support, and emotional reciprocity. These two parts begin fighting quietly inside the nervous system. One says, "Keep helping." The other whispers, "I'm tired." One says, "Be understanding." The other says, "But who understands me?" One says, "Do not disappoint anyone." The other says, "I cannot keep disappearing like this." This inner conflict becomes emotionally exhausting because neither side fully wins. The person continues giving while secretly feeling emotionally abandoned. Many people in this state also struggle with guilt any time they try prioritizing themselves. The moment they rest, they feel selfish. The moment they set boundaries, they feel cruel. The moment they stop over-giving emotionally, anxiety appears inside them. This happens because their nervous system became conditioned to associate self-sacrifice with love and safety. But self-abandonment is not love, and one of the hardest truths emotionally burdened people must eventually face is this. People may continue taking from you for as long as you continue abandoning yourself to give. Not always intentionally, not always maliciously, but human beings naturally adjust to the emotional patterns we teach them. If you constantly place yourself last, people slowly become accustomed to your self-neglect. This realization can feel heartbreaking because many calm people secretly hoped someone would notice their exhaustion without needing to say anything. They hoped someone would finally care for them with the same attentiveness they give others. But healing begins when you stop waiting for others to rescue the parts of yourself you keep abandoning. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering deepens when attachment blinds us to reality. And many emotionally burdened people remain attached to the hope that endless patience and sacrifice will eventually earn them emotional safety, appreciation, or unconditional care. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes people simply become comfortable receiving what you continually provide. This is why boundaries become necessary, not because love disappeared, but because resentment grows wherever self-neglect becomes chronic. One painful sign of quiet resentment is emotional withdrawal. You begin emotionally pulling away from people, even people you care about deeply, not because you hate them, but because your spirit feels overused. You no longer have emotional energy left to give naturally. Conversations feel heavy, requests feel overwhelming. Even small emotional demands begin irritating you internally. And then guilt appears because you no longer recognize yourself. You wonder, why am I becoming emotionally distant? But often the answer is not lack of love. It is emotional depletion. The soul cannot endlessly pour from an empty emotional cup. Another painful effect of constantly postponing your needs is that you slowly begin believing your needs matter, less than everyone else's. This belief becomes deeply embedded in the nervous system over time. You stop asking for help, Stop expressing disappointment. Stop communicating emotional needs clearly. Stop expecting emotional reciprocity. And eventually, you become emotionally invisible inside your own relationships. Not because others intentionally erased you, but because you quietly erased yourself first. This is one of the deepest emotional wounds peacekeepers carry. They become experts at supporting others while feeling deeply unsupported themselves. And because they rarely complain openly, nobody fully understands how much pain has accumulated quietly inside them. Buddhist teachings remind us that attachment to roles creates suffering, and many emotionally burdened people became attached to the role of the strong one, the calm one, the understanding one. But every role becomes painful when it forces you to betray your authentic emotional reality. Because beneath the calmness, beneath the patience, beneath the emotional control, there is still a human being with needs, limits, fears, exhaustion, and longing. And those parts deserve attention too. True healing begins when you stop viewing your needs as inconveniences, when you stop apologizing for needing rest, when you stop feeling guilty for wanting emotional support, when you stop believing your worth depends on how much pain you can carry quietly. Because resentment is often the soul's cry for balance. It is the emotional signal that something inside you has been neglected for too long. And instead of shaming yourself for feeling it, Buddhist wisdom invites you to become aware of it compassionately, not to become bitter, not to become selfish, but to finally stop abandoning yourself while trying to save everyone else emotionally. Because the truth is, the heart grows tired when it is constantly asked to give love while never receiving enough care in return. And eventually, even the calmest soul begins quietly aching for the same understanding it has spent years giving to everyone else. And maybe that is why the resentment hurts so deeply. Not because you stopped loving people, but because somewhere along the way, you quietly disappeared inside the role of always being emotionally dependable. You became the one everyone leaned on, the one who stayed calm during chaos, the one who carried emotional weight without complaining. But after years of giving strength to everyone else, another painful truth slowly begins to reveal itself. The moment people become used to your emotional strength, they often stop seeing it as something you offer and start seeing it as something you owe. That is when emotional strength slowly stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like a role you are expected to perform. There is a special kind of exhaustion that comes from feeling like you are never allowed to fall apart. A pressure that quietly grows inside people who are always seen as the stable one, the wise one, the patient one, or the emotionally mature one. Everyone admires their calmness, but very few people ask how much pain is hidden beneath that emotional control. At first, emotional strength feels empowering. People trust you, depend on you, respect your ability to stay composed during difficult moments. You become the safe place others run to when life hurts them. And because helping others gives you purpose, you step into the role naturally. But over time, something dangerous begins happening. Your emotional strength becomes expected instead of appreciated. People stop asking if you are okay because they assume you always will be. People stop noticing your exhaustion because they are too used to your stability. People begin leaning on you emotionally without realizing how heavy it has become for you to carry everyone constantly, and eventually you begin feeling trapped inside the image everyone has built of you. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment to identity creates suffering, and many emotionally strong people become trapped inside identities they never consciously chose. The strong one, the calm one, the dependable one, the wise one. These identities may sound positive on the surface, but they slowly become emotional cages when you no longer feel free to express anything outside of them. Because once people become comfortable with your emotional strength, vulnerability begins feeling dangerous. You start worrying about disappointing people. You fear becoming emotionally inconvenient. You feel pressure to maintain the image of composure even when your inner world feels exhausted. And little by little, emotional strength stops being authentic and becomes performance. Some people reach a point where they do not even know how to ask for help anymore. Their nervous system has been conditioned to believe they must always be the stable one in the room. They become uncomfortable receiving support because they are so used to being the supporter. Even during emotional pain, they instinctively minimize themselves. "I'll be okay. It's not that serious. Other people have bigger problems." Meanwhile, inside, they are drowning quietly. One of the saddest things about performing emotional strength is that people often admire your ability to carry pain while never realizing how much damage the carrying is doing to you. They compliment your calmness without understanding the emotional suppression underneath it. They praise your resilience without seeing how exhausted your spirit has become from never fully resting emotionally. And because emotionally strong people often hide their pain well, others assume they need less care than everyone else. This creates deep, emotional loneliness. Not because nobody values you, but because very few people truly see the human being beneath the strength. Many emotionally strong people secretly long for a place where they do not have to hold everything together, a place where they can finally exhale, a place where they do not need to perform wisdom, calmness, patience, or emotional control. But they often struggle finding that space because the role has followed them into every relationship. At work, they are the reliable one. In the family, they are the peacemaker. Among friends, they are the therapist. In relationships, they are the emotionally stable partner. Everywhere they go, people hand them emotional responsibility because they appear capable of carrying it. And slowly, the emotional burden becomes so normalized that they forget they are allowed to struggle too. Buddhist teachings often speak about suffering created by attachment to masks and identities. Human beings suffer deeply when they feel separated from their authentic emotional reality. And emotionally strong people often become disconnected from authenticity because they spend so much time managing how others experience them. They become emotionally edited versions of themselves, controlled, measured, careful, always composed, always understanding, always emotionally available. But human beings were never designed to live in constant emotional performance. Even the strongest nervous system eventually becomes exhausted from suppressing emotional truth. Some emotionally strong people become terrified of vulnerability because they fear it will change how others see them. They fear becoming disappointing, weak, unstable, too emotional. So they continue carrying pain silently while maintaining the image of strength everyone expects from them. This creates internal emotional isolation. People may know your strength deeply, while never knowing you're suffering at all. And perhaps one of the most painful moments comes when you finally begin struggling emotionally and realize people do not know how to respond because they are so used to you being the strong one. Some people even become uncomfortable when emotionally strong individuals finally express exhaustion. Not because they are cruel, but because they unconsciously depended on that person's stability. Your emotional strength became part of the emotional structure around them. The moment you stop performing that role, the emotional dynamic shifts. This is why many emotionally strong people continue suffering silently for years. They fear the consequences of no longer being emotionally dependable all the time. They fear letting others down. They fear becoming emotionally needy. They fear what happens if they finally admit they are tired. But Buddhist wisdom reminds us that true peace cannot exist where truth is constantly suppressed. And many emotionally strong people suppress enormous emotional truth every day. They suppress loneliness, they suppress fear, they suppress emotional fatigue, they suppress disappointment, they suppress the desire to stop carrying everyone else for a while. The body notices this suppression long before the mind fully understands it. Chronic fatigue, anxiety, emotional numbness, sleep problems, chest tightness, mental exhaustion. A nervous system constantly stuck in emotional alertness. The body begins carrying the weight of the emotional role you never put down. One painful aspect of performing emotional strength is that people often confuse your ability to endure pain with proof that the pain is not affecting you deeply. But endurance is not the same thing as emotional health. A person can continue functioning while suffering intensely inside. A person can remain calm while feeling emotionally overwhelmed. A person can comfort others while secretly feeling empty themselves. And emotionally. Strong people become masters at hiding emotional pain because they learned early in life that others rely on their composure. Some learned this in childhood. Maybe they had to become emotionally mature too early. Maybe they became caretakers in unstable homes. Maybe they learned that showing vulnerability created more chaos. Maybe nobody emotionally supported them, so they learned to support themselves and everyone else too. Over time, strength stopped being a choice and became survival. And survival patterns eventually become emotional prisons when they are never questioned. Many emotionally strong people do not realize they are performing strength because the performance feels natural now. They have repeated it for so long that it became part of their identity. But deep down, there is often grief. Grief for the softness they lost. Grief for the emotional safety they never received. Grief for the part of themselves that wanted comfort but learned to survive without it. Buddhist teachings emphasize awareness because awareness breaks unconscious patterns. The moment you begin noticing that your emotional strength has become performance instead of authentic stability, healing can finally begin. Because true emotional strength does not require constant suppression. True emotional strength allows honesty. It allows rest. It allows asking for help. It allows emotional humanity. The strongest people are not those who never break emotionally. The strongest people are those who stop hiding from their own truth. Many emotionally strong people secretly carry enormous pressure to hold everything together. They believe if they collapse emotionally, everything around them will collapse too. This creates chronic nervous system tension because they never fully feel allowed to let go. Even during personal pain, they continue showing up for others. Even during emotional exhaustion, they continue supporting everyone. Even while grieving, struggling, or overwhelmed, they continue performing emotional stability because they do not know how to stop. And eventually the soul begins aching for permission to simply be human, not inspiring, not wise, not emotionally perfect, just human. One of the most healing moments for emotionally burdened people is realizing they do not need to earn love by constantly being emotionally strong. They do not need to deserve care through endless emotional sacrifice. They do not need to hide their pain to remain valuable. Because real connection cannot exist where emotional performance replaces emotional truth. Many people who perform emotional strength also struggle deeply with receiving. Compliments feel uncomfortable, support feels unfamiliar, vulnerability feels unsafe. They instinctively move back into the caretaker role because that role feels emotionally predictable. But healing requires learning how to receive too. Receive care, receive understanding, receive support, receive emotional space without guilt. This can feel terrifying for people whose identity became built around emotional resilience, but Buddhism teaches balance, not endless giving. Even compassion becomes unhealthy when it completely excludes the self. And perhaps one of the deepest lies emotionally strong people believe is this: if I stop being strong, people will stop needing me. But being needed is not the same thing as being loved fully. Some people only know your strength, not your soul. Some only know what you provide emotionally, not who you are beneath the emotional labor. And healing begins when you finally stop building your worth around how much pain you can carry quietly. Because emotional strength should never become emotional imprisonment. You were never meant to spend your entire life performing calmness while secretly starving for comfort yourself. You were never meant to become the emotional foundation everyone stands on while your own inner world slowly collapses underneath you. And maybe true healing finally begins the moment you stop asking yourself, "How can I keep holding everything together for everyone else?" and begin asking a much deeper question. What happens if I finally allow myself to be held too? And maybe that is the painful question emotionally strong people avoid for most of their lives. What would happen if they finally stopped carrying everything alone? What would happen if they admitted they were tired, overwhelmed, emotionally hurt, or no longer able to keep holding themselves together perfectly? For many people, even thinking about that possibility creates fear. Because after years of being admired for their strength, they quietly begin believing that falling apart would somehow make them less valuable. And this is where another hidden danger begins to grow, the danger of being praised for never breaking down. There is something deeply seductive about being called strong. Human beings naturally crave approval, especially when that approval comes after surviving pain quietly. When people praise your emotional endurance, it can feel comforting at first. You feel respected, admired, needed. People look at you and say things like, "I don't know how you do it," or "You're always so strong," or "You handle everything so well." But hidden inside those compliments is sometimes a dangerous message. Keep carrying the pain quietly. Keep functioning no matter what. Keep surviving without needing support. Keep being the one who never falls apart. And over time, emotionally burdened people begin building their identity around this image of unbreakable strength. At first, they may not even notice it happening. They simply continue doing what they have always done. Staying calm, staying composed, staying emotionally controlled while carrying enormous internal pressure. But slowly, the praise itself becomes part of the prison. Because once people admire you for never breaking down begins feeling like failure. You start feeling pressure to maintain emotional composure no matter how overwhelmed you become. Even during grief, heartbreak, exhaustion, disappointment, or emotional burnout, part of you keeps whispering, "Stay strong." Not because you are emotionally healthy, but because your nervous system learned that strength is what makes people value you. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment creates suffering, and many emotionally strong people become attached to the image of resilience because it became tied to love, identity, approval, and emotional safety. But no human being can endlessly suppress emotional pain without consequences. The body always remembers what the mind tries to hide. One of the most painful things about being praised for never breaking down is that people often stop checking on you emotionally. Your ability to endure suffering quietly creates the illusion that you need less care than everyone else. People assume you are okay because you still function, because you still smile, because you still help others, because you still appear emotionally composed. But functioning is not the same thing as healing. A person can continue carrying responsibilities while secretly falling apart inside. A person can comfort others while privately drowning in emotional exhaustion. A person can appear calm while their nervous system quietly lives in survival mode every single day. Many emotionally strong people learned early in life that vulnerability was unsafe. Maybe they grew up in environments where emotional expression was ignored, mocked, or punished. Maybe they became caretakers too young. Maybe they learned that if they fell apart, nobody would catch them. So they adapted. They became emotionally self-contained. They learned to cry quietly, to process pain alone, to continue functioning no matter how hurt they felt. And eventually, people began praising this survival response as emotional strength. But survival and healing are not the same thing. Survival says, keep going no matter what. Healing says, you deserve rest too. Survival says, do not let anyone see your pain. Healing says, your pain deserves compassion too. Survival says, hold everything together. Healing says, you are allowed to be human. Many people who are praised for being strong secretly become terrified of emotional collapse. They fear that if they finally stop holding everything together, all the emotions they buried for years will come rushing out at once. And honestly, sometimes they are right, because suppressed emotions accumulate. Grief accumulates, loneliness accumulates, exhaustion accumulates, unspoken pain accumulates. The nervous system can only carry so much emotional weight before the body begins demanding release. This is why some emotionally strong people suddenly experience anxiety attacks, emotional numbness, deep exhaustion, burnout, or emotional breakdowns after years of appearing completely fine. From the outside, it seems sudden. But internally, the pressure had been building for a very long time. The soul becomes tired of performing strength constantly. And one of the saddest parts is that many emotionally strong people feel ashamed when they finally begin struggling emotionally. They think, what is wrong with me? I'm supposed to be stronger than this. But true strength is not emotional suppression. True strength is emotional honesty. Buddhist wisdom never teaches emotional perfection. It teaches awareness, compassion, and balance. Yet many emotionally burdened people unconsciously turn strength into a performance of emotional invulnerability. They become addicted to appearing okay. Not because they are fake people, but because they fear what might happen if others finally see how deeply tired they are. There is also a dangerous emotional loneliness that comes from always being the strong one. People naturally lean on you during difficult moments, but few people realize that emotionally strong individuals need support too. Sometimes nobody asks how they are doing because everyone assumes they can handle everything. Sometimes emotionally strong people stop asking for help because they became too used to surviving alone. This creates emotional isolation hidden beneath competence. The strong friend, the stable partner, the reliable family member, the calm leader. Everyone sees the role. Very few see the emotional cost of constantly playing it, and eventually emotional praise becomes emotional pressure. You feel pressure to stay calm during chaos, pressure to remain emotionally mature no matter how badly others behave, pressure to forgive quickly, pressure to carry pain gracefully, pressure to survive suffering without needing too much from anyone. This pressure slowly disconnects you from your emotional humanity. You begin feeling guilty for struggling, guilty for resting, guilty for needing support, guilty for feeling overwhelmed, because somewhere deep inside, you absorbed the belief that your value comes from your ability to endure pain silently. But Buddhism teaches something completely different. Human suffering is not something to hide from. It is something to become aware of compassionately. The Buddha never taught people to pretend they were unaffected by pain. He taught them to observe suffering honestly without becoming imprisoned by it. Yet, emotionally strong people often skip honest awareness completely and move straight into emotional suppression. Instead of asking, what am I truly carrying right now? They ask, how do I keep functioning? And functioning becomes their emotional addiction. Even when exhausted, they continue showing up. Even when emotionally empty, they continue supporting others. Even when silently hurting, they continue being dependable. And because society often rewards productivity, composure, and emotional resilience, nobody notices how dangerous this pattern has become. Many emotionally strong people secretly believe they are only lovable when they are useful. This belief often forms unconsciously through years of being praised for how much they can handle. You're so mature. You always stay calm. You're so reliable. You're the strongest person I know. At first, these compliments feel loving, but over time they can quietly teach a painful lesson. Your worth comes from how much suffering you can survive without collapsing. This is why vulnerability begins feeling terrifying. Because if your identity is built around being emotionally unbreakable, then emotional honesty feels like losing yourself. Some emotionally strong people even become uncomfortable around their own sadness. The moment tears appear, they try to stop them. The moment emotional exhaustion surfaces, they distract themselves. The moment vulnerability rises, they apologize for it. Their nervous system learned that emotions are acceptable only if they remain controlled. But suppressed emotions never disappear. They simply move deeper into the body. Sometimes they become chronic tension, sometimes emotional numbness, sometimes anxiety, sometimes quiet hopelessness, sometimes deep exhaustion that sleep alone cannot fix. Because emotional exhaustion is not always physical tiredness. Sometimes it is the soul collapsing under years of unprocessed emotional pressure. Buddhist wisdom often speaks about impermanence. Everything changes. Everything rises and falls, emotions included. But emotionally strong people often try to freeze themselves into permanent emotional stability. They fear emotional fluctuation because instability feels unsafe. So they stay emotionally guarded, always composed, always careful, always carrying themselves with control. But true inner peace is flexible, alive, honest. It allows emotional movement without shame. A person at peace can cry without feeling weak, can ask for help without feeling broken, can admit exhaustion without feeling like a failure, can rest without needing to earn it through suffering first. Many emotionally strong people were never taught this kind of emotional safety. They learned how to survive pain, not how to receive care during pain. And perhaps this is why praise can become dangerous. Because people may admire your endurance while completely missing your emotional suffering underneath it. The world often celebrates resilience while ignoring emotional wounds. People applaud the person who keeps functioning after heartbreak, the person who keeps smiling during grief, the person who stays composed under pressure. But very few ask whether constantly enduring pain silently is emotionally healthy. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stop pretending they are okay. That takes enormous courage. Because emotional honesty threatens every survival pattern emotionally strong people built over years. It threatens the role, the identity, the image, the expectation. But healing begins where performance ends. Healing begins when you stop treating emotional breakdown as weakness and begin seeing it as accumulated pain, finally asking to be acknowledged. The nervous system was never meant to carry endless emotional pressure without release. Even nature releases tension, storms release rain, trees shed leaves, oceans move constantly. Yet emotionally burdened people often expect themselves to remain endlessly composed no matter what life places on their shoulders. This is not peace. This is emotional imprisonment disguised as strength. One of the most powerful moments in healing happens when emotionally strong people finally realize something deeply important. They do not need to earn love through endless endurance. They do not need to prove their worth by carrying pain silently. They do not need to stay emotionally composed every second to deserve care, because being human means having limits. It means feeling overwhelmed sometimes. It means needing support too. And perhaps true emotional strength finally begins the moment you stop being proud of how much pain you can hide and start becoming honest about how much you have been carrying alone all this time. And maybe that is the moment the emotionally strong person finally begins noticing something heartbreaking. They spent so many years becoming skilled at carrying pain quietly that they forgot something very important. Strength without honesty slowly turns into emotional disappearance. The moment you become proud of how much you can endure without needing anything from anyone, you slowly begin abandoning the parts of yourself that were begging to be seen, heard, comforted, and protected too. And nowhere does this happen more quietly than in the habit of always understanding everyone else. There is a deep exhaustion that comes from constantly seeing other people's side while nobody truly sees yours. A quiet emotional ache that develops when you spend years excusing hurtful behavior, minimizing your own pain, and convincing yourself that understanding others is more important than protecting your own emotional well-being. At first, it feels compassionate. You try to understand why people act the way they do, why they become distant, why they hurt you, why they fail to show up emotionally, why they disappoint you. You look at their childhood, their trauma, their stress, their fears, their struggles. You become emotionally generous in the way you interpret people's behavior. And this emotional sensitivity can be beautiful when balanced with wisdom. But without balance, understanding others slowly becomes self-abandonment. Because somewhere along the way, many emotionally caring people stop asking an important question. What about the pain this caused me? Instead of honoring their own hurt, they immediately shift focus toward understanding the other person. They become so compassionate toward everyone else's wounds that they stop protecting their own heart entirely. Buddhist wisdom teaches compassion, but it never teaches emotional self-erasure. True compassion includes awareness, boundaries, and honesty. Yet many emotionally burdened people misunderstand compassion completely. They believe being understanding means tolerating behavior that slowly destroys their peace, so they stay too long in unhealthy relationships, forgive too quickly, excuse repeated emotional harm, ignore red flags, suppress anger, silence disappointment, all because they do not want to seem selfish, cold, dramatic, or unforgiving. And little by little they disappear emotionally inside relationships where everyone else's feelings matter more than theirs. One of the most painful things about constantly understanding others is that it creates internal emotional confusion. You begin invalidating your own emotional experience automatically. Someone hurts you, and instead of saying, "That deeply affected me," your mind says, "They're probably just struggling." Someone repeatedly disappoints you, and instead of acknowledging the pain honestly, you say, "They've been through a lot." Someone emotionally neglects you, and instead of protecting yourself, you keep making excuses for why they behave that way. Over time, this pattern becomes dangerous because your nervous system learns something painful. My emotions are less important than everyone else's emotions, and once that belief settles deeply into the mind, self-abandonment begins feeling normal. Many emotionally sensitive people pride themselves on being understanding. They see themselves as patient, compassionate, emotionally mature people. But there is a huge difference between compassion and self-neglect. Compassion says, "I understand your pain." Self-abandonment says, "Your pain matters more than mine." Compassion says, "I see your struggles." Self-abandonment says, "I must tolerate emotional harm because I understand why you do it." Compassion keeps your heart open. Self-abandonment leaves your heart unprotected. This difference is life-changing, because some people spend years emotionally starving while convincing themselves they are simply being compassionate. There is also another painful layer to this pattern. Many emotionally understanding people become deeply uncomfortable with conflict. So instead of confronting behavior that hurts them, they emotionally rationalize it. They explain it away, minimize it, intellectualize it. Instead of allowing themselves to feel anger naturally, they immediately move into empathy for the other person. And while empathy is beautiful, forced empathy can become emotional suppression. Sometimes your anger exists for a reason. Sometimes your hurt deserves acknowledgement. Sometimes your disappointment is trying to protect you from continued emotional harm. But people who constantly understand others often silence these emotional warning signs before they can fully speak. Buddhist teachings emphasize mindful awareness partly because awareness requires honesty. And many emotionally burdened people are honest about everyone else's suffering except their own. They see other people's wounds clearly. but they become blind to their own emotional injuries. One painful reason this happens is because many emotionally caring people fear being misunderstood themselves. They know what it feels like to suffer internally while nobody fully sees the deeper reasons behind their behavior. So they become extremely compassionate toward other people's flaws and emotional struggles. But eventually, this compassion loses balance. They stop protecting themselves, stop setting limits, stop acknowledging emotional harm clearly, and instead of relationships becoming healthier, they slowly become emotionally one-sided. The emotionally understanding person keeps adapting while the other person keeps taking emotional space. This creates deep exhaustion because the relationship slowly revolves around one person's emotional reality while the other person quietly disappears inside understanding. Many emotionally understanding people also secretly believe that if they love hard enough, understand deeply enough, stay patient enough, or give enough emotional grace, eventually the other person will finally love them correctly. So they keep waiting, keep understanding, keep excusing, keep emotionally overextending themselves. Meanwhile, their own unmet emotional needs continue growing silently in the background, and over time, quiet resentment begins forming beneath the compassion, not because they stopped caring, but because no human being can survive endless emotional self-neglect without pain. There are people who have become so emotionally focused on understanding others that they no longer know how to defend themselves emotionally. They instinctively explain away hurtful behavior before fully processing their own feelings. Someone lies to them, and they think about the person's stress. Someone emotionally neglects them, and they focus on the person's trauma. Someone disappoints them repeatedly, and they remind themselves the person is trying their best. But somewhere in all this understanding, their own emotional truth disappears completely. And the frightening part is that many people around them may never realize they are hurting because emotionally understanding people rarely express pain directly. They internalize it quietly, carry it privately, process it alone, all while continuing to offer compassion outward. This creates emotional imbalance that slowly drains the nervous system. Buddhist wisdom teaches the importance of compassion with wisdom. Wisdom matters because compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. If your compassion constantly requires betraying your own emotional reality, it is no longer healthy compassion. Many emotionally understanding people secretly struggle with deep emotional loneliness because they are constantly emotionally attuned to others while nobody seems equally attuned to them. They notice subtle emotional shifts in everyone, notice sadness behind smiles, notice emotional tension immediately, notice when someone needs support. But few people notice their pain because they became experts at hiding it behind understanding, and over time they begin feeling emotionally unseen. Not because others intentionally ignore them, but because they trained everyone to focus away from them emotionally. One painful sign of self-abandonment is constantly questioning whether your emotional needs are too much. Emotionally understanding people often become afraid of asking for reassurance, consistency, honesty, support, or emotional accountability because they fear seeming needy. So they stay silent, even while hurting deeply, even while feeling emotionally neglected, even while longing for basic emotional care. They convince themselves that understanding others is the more loving choice, but love without self-respect slowly becomes emotional suffering. Buddhist teachings never ask you to abandon yourself in the name of compassion. The Buddha taught balance, awareness, wisdom, presence, not endless emotional self-sacrifice. There is also a dangerous emotional habit that develops when you always prioritize understanding others. You begin doubting your own emotional instincts. Every time something hurts you, you immediately talk yourself out of trusting your feelings. You think, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. They didn't mean it that way. They've been stressed lately. Slowly, your emotional intuition weakens because you no longer trust your own pain signals, and this becomes dangerous because emotional pain often exists to protect you. Hurt feelings are not always irrational. Sometimes they are messages from the nervous system saying, "Something here is not emotionally safe for you." But emotionally understanding people often override these signals in order to preserve relationships. And eventually, they become emotionally exhausted from constantly betraying themselves internally. One of the saddest realities about self-abandonment is that it often happens quietly. No dramatic collapse, no obvious breakdown, just years of slowly placing yourself second emotionally until your inner world becomes filled with unspoken grief. Grief for the times you needed protection but gave understanding instead. Grief for the times you deserved honesty but accepted inconsistency instead. Grief for the times you needed comfort but became the comforter again instead. This emotional grief builds slowly because your soul notices every moment you abandon yourself to keep others emotionally comfortable. And eventually, the body notices too. Chronic emotional fatigue, anxiety, numbness, difficulty trusting yourself, emotional confusion, overthinking. The nervous system becomes exhausted from constantly prioritizing everyone else's emotions above your own. Many emotionally understanding people also attract emotionally immature individuals because emotionally immature people feel safe around endless understanding. If someone keeps excusing your behavior, you rarely feel pressure to grow. This creates unhealthy relationship dynamics where one person constantly adapts while the other remains emotionally careless. And because the emotionally understanding person fears conflict, they often continue tolerating imbalance far longer than they should. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that attachment creates suffering, and many emotionally understanding people become attached to the role of healer, peacemaker, or emotional caretaker. Their identity becomes rooted in being compassionate, patient, and emotionally giving. But every role becomes dangerous when it requires self-betrayal. True compassion does not ask you to silence your pain endlessly. True compassion does not require you to abandon your emotional truth. True compassion includes yourself too. And perhaps this is one of the hardest lessons emotionally burdened people must learn. You are allowed to understand someone's pain and still acknowledge the pain they caused you. Both things can be true. Someone can have trauma and still hurt you. Someone can be struggling and still behave unfairly. Someone can be wounded and still damage your peace. Understanding someone's suffering does not mean you must tolerate endless emotional harm from them. This realization changes everything because emotionally understanding people often think boundaries mean lack of compassion. But boundaries are compassion with wisdom. Boundaries say, "I understand your pain, but I will not disappear inside it." Boundaries say, "I care about you, but my emotional well-being matters too." Boundaries say, "I can empathize with your struggles without abandoning myself." And perhaps true healing begins the moment you stop using compassion to justify your own emotional neglect. Because the truth is, always understanding others, while never protecting yourself, eventually leaves you emotionally empty. Not because your heart was too soft, but because you gave everyone else emotional understanding while quietly refusing to give that same understanding to yourself. And maybe that is where many emotionally exhausted people finally begin seeing the truth clearly for the first time. They spent years trying to protect everyone from pain, disappointment, guilt, sadness, tension, or emotional discomfort. They believed love meant softening every hard emotion for others. They believed compassion meant constantly rescuing people from consequences, difficult feelings, or inner struggles. But somewhere along the way, they slowly destroyed their own peace, trying to keep everyone else emotionally comfortable. And this is where one of the hardest Buddhist lessons begins, learning to let people feel their own discomfort. There is a deep fear many emotionally caring people carry inside them. the fear of watching someone they love struggle emotionally without immediately trying to fix it. The moment another person becomes uncomfortable, anxious, upset, disappointed, or emotionally distressed, something inside them reacts automatically. Fix it, calm it, repair it, make it better, restore peace quickly. And because this reaction often comes from genuine love, many people never question it. They assume helping others avoid discomfort is compassion. But Buddhist wisdom teaches something far deeper and far more difficult. Not all discomfort is harmful. Some discomfort awakens people. Some discomfort teaches people. Some discomfort helps people grow. And when you constantly rescue people from every uncomfortable emotion, you may accidentally interrupt lessons their soul needs to experience. This realization can feel deeply uncomfortable for emotionally responsible people because they built their identity around helping, around soothing pain, around emotionally stabilizing everyone around them. But eventually, they begin noticing something painful. The more they rescue others emotionally, the more emotionally exhausted they become themselves. Because carrying everyone's discomfort eventually becomes unbearable. Many emotionally burdened people feel responsible for emotions that were never truly theirs to manage. If someone is disappointed, they immediately feel pressure to fix it. If someone is upset with them, anxiety rises instantly. If someone feels uncomfortable after hearing the truth, they rush to soften it. Over time, their entire nervous system becomes organized around emotional damage control. And this creates constant internal tension. Buddhist teachings speak often about attachment because attachment creates suffering. And many emotionally sensitive people become deeply attached to keeping everyone emotionally comfortable. They fear emotional discomfort so much that they begin sacrificing honesty, boundaries, rest, and inner peace to avoid it. But avoiding discomfort is not the same thing as healing. Some emotions need to be felt fully. Sadness, disappointment, regret, loneliness, frustration, loss. Growth often begins in discomfort. The Buddha himself taught that suffering is part of human existence, not because suffering is good, but because avoiding all suffering is impossible. Wisdom does not come from endlessly escaping discomfort. Wisdom comes from learning how to sit with discomfort consciously instead of constantly running from it. But emotionally over-responsible people often try to rescue everyone from emotional pain immediately because watching discomfort triggers anxiety inside themselves. This is important to understand. Sometimes people are not trying to fix others because others truly need fixing. Sometimes they are trying to fix others because discomfort makes them emotionally unsafe internally. This pattern often begins in childhood. A child growing up around emotional instability may learn that conflict or emotional distress feels dangerous. So they become hyper-focused on calming emotional situations quickly. They become emotionally responsible far too early. They learn to smooth over tension, comfort others, and prevent emotional explosions before they happen. As adults, they continue this pattern automatically. The moment someone becomes upset, they feel internally responsible for restoring emotional balance. But this creates enormous suffering because human emotions are not fully controllable. People are allowed to feel disappointment, allowed to feel sadness, allowed to feel frustration, allowed to sit with uncomfortable truths, and emotionally rescuing everyone prevents emotional maturity from developing naturally. One painful truth many emotionally burdened people must eventually face is this: some people grow only after, feeling the consequences of their choices fully, but if you constantly absorb discomfort for them, they never truly face themselves. You apologize for things that were not your fault. You over-explain to ease their discomfort. You suppress your boundaries to keep peace. You carry emotional guilt that belongs to someone else. And over time, this creates emotional imbalance in relationships. One person keeps adapting emotionally while the other avoids accountability. Buddhist wisdom teaches compassion, but it also teaches detachment. Detachment does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means understanding that every human being has their own karmic path, their own lessons, and their own emotional process. You can support people without carrying their emotional journey for them. This distinction changes everything. Many emotionally caring people secretly believe that if someone they love feels pain, they have failed somehow. But this belief creates impossible emotional pressure because pain is part of life. You cannot prevent every disappointment, heartbreak, mistake, or uncomfortable emotion for another person. And trying to do so will eventually destroy your nervous system. There are people who feel guilty simply because someone is unhappy with them. Even when they have done nothing wrong, their body reacts with anxiety. They immediately start trying to repair the emotional atmosphere. Why? Because somewhere deep inside, they learned that emotional discomfort equals danger. So instead of allowing others to process emotions naturally, they rush to rescue them. But Buddhism teaches that awareness grows through direct experience. Some truths cannot be understood intellectually. They must be felt emotionally. A person may need to sit with loneliness before learning self-awareness. A person may need to feel regret before changing harmful behavior. A person may need to experience emotional consequences before developing maturity. And when you constantly remove discomfort for others, you may accidentally keep them emotionally dependent. This is one reason emotionally exhausted people often feel trapped in caretaker roles. Others unconsciously learn that they will always absorb tension, always fix emotional situations, always soften hard realities. And eventually, people stop learning how to regulate themselves emotionally because someone else keeps doing it for them. Meanwhile, the emotionally responsible person becomes increasingly drained. Buddhist wisdom emphasizes balance because compassion without boundaries becomes suffering. You are allowed to care deeply about someone while still allowing them to experience their own emotional process. You are allowed to say no, allowed to disappoint people, allowed to stop over-explaining, allowed to let someone sit with discomfort instead of immediately rescuing them from it. This can feel terrifying at first for emotionally over-responsible people because they fear being seen as cold, selfish, or uncaring. But true compassion is not emotional over-functioning. True compassion respects both people, including yourself. One painful pattern many emotionally burdened people carry is compulsive emotional soothing. The moment someone around them feels uncomfortable, they immediately begin emotionally managing the situation. They soften truths, avoid difficult conversations, take blame unnecessarily, suppress their own emotions, all to restore emotional comfort quickly. But constantly protecting people from discomfort creates relationships built on emotional avoidance instead of truth. And truth matters deeply in Buddhist teachings. Not harshness, not cruelty, but honest awareness. A relationship cannot become truly healthy if one person constantly abandons themselves to keep the emotional environment calm. Many emotionally sensitive people also struggle with watching others misunderstand them. The moment someone becomes upset or disappointed, they desperately try to make themselves understood completely. They explain endlessly, defend themselves gently, over-clarify intentions, not because they enjoy it, but because emotional tension feels unbearable internally. But one of the hardest Buddhist lessons is accepting that not everyone will fully understand you all the time. And that is okay. People are allowed to have emotional reactions, allowed to process feelings, allowed to sit with confusion temporarily. You do not have to destroy your peace trying to control every emotional outcome. This realization can feel almost revolutionary for chronic peacekeepers, because many of them secretly believe they are responsible for everyone's emotional experience around them. But you are not responsible for regulating every emotion another human being feels. You are responsible for honesty, compassion, and integrity, not emotional perfection. One reason this practice feels so difficult is because emotionally burdened people often confuse discomfort with harm. But discomfort is not always harmful. Sometimes discomfort is growth beginning. A difficult conversation may create temporary tension, but long-term healing. A boundary may disappoint someone, but protect your nervous system. A truthful answer may make someone uncomfortable, but finally create honesty. And many emotionally exhausted people are tired precisely because they spent years avoiding discomfort at the cost of authenticity. Buddhist monks often practice sitting quietly with discomfort during meditation. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because they understand something modern life constantly avoids. Freedom begins when you stop running from discomfort automatically. The same truth applies emotionally. The moment you stop rushing to fix every uncomfortable feeling around you, your nervous system begins relaxing for the first time in years. You stop carrying emotional responsibilities that were never truly yours. You stop over-functioning constantly. You stop feeling responsible for everyone's moods. And slowly, your spirit begins breathing again. Many emotionally responsible people are shocked when they first begin allowing others to sit with discomfort naturally. They realize how much emotional labor they had been performing unconsciously every single day, trying to make everyone okay, trying to prevent tension, trying to rescue emotions before they fully formed. It is exhausting and often invisible. One painful sign that you have become emotionally over-responsible is feeling guilty whenever someone experiences discomfort because of your boundaries, honesty, or emotional needs. You say no, then feel anxious afterward. You express truth, then immediately worry you hurt someone. You choose yourself emotionally, then feel selfish for it. This happens because your nervous system became conditioned to prioritize external emotional harmony over inner emotional peace. But Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment to external harmony creates suffering when it requires abandoning truth. Some people will feel uncomfortable when you stop emotionally rescuing them. Some may become frustrated when you stop over-explaining. Some may dislike boundaries. Some may resist accountability, and this can feel deeply painful for emotionally sensitive people because they genuinely care about others. But caring about someone does not mean carrying their emotions for them. It means respecting their humanity enough to allow them to experience life honestly. One of the most compassionate things you can sometimes do is step back, not abandon, not punish, not become cold, but step back enough to stop interfering with another person's emotional growth. Because every human being must eventually learn how to sit with discomfort themselves. And perhaps one of the deepest forms of healing begins when emotionally burdened people finally realize this truth. They are not responsible for saving everyone from emotional discomfort. They are allowed to stop over-carrying, allowed to stop over-soothing, allowed to stop abandoning themselves every time someone else feels emotionally uneasy. Because the moment you stop trying to emotionally rescue every person around you, something unexpected begins happening. You finally start rescuing yourself. And maybe that is when something inside the emotionally exhausted person finally begins shifting. After years of trying to rescue everyone from discomfort, they slowly begin realizing how much of their life was spent carrying emotional responsibility that was never fully theirs. They begin noticing how often they became the emotional shelter for everyone around them while quietly standing in the storm alone themselves. And this is one of the deepest tragedies calm people experience. They become safe places for others, but forget to seek safety for themselves. There is something incredibly comforting about calm people. Their energy feels soft, steady, non-judgmental. People naturally open up around them because they create emotional space where others feel accepted, understood, and emotionally protected. They listen carefully. They do not explode easily. They know how to stay grounded during emotional chaos. And because of this, people are drawn toward them almost instinctively. But behind that calmness is often a painful reality nobody notices. The safe place rarely feels safe too. Many calm people spend years becoming emotional homes for everyone else, while secretly feeling emotionally homeless inside themselves. Others run to them during heartbreak, anxiety, confusion, grief, or emotional collapse. Everyone feels lighter after. Speaking to them, everyone feels calmer around them. Everyone trusts them with vulnerability. But when the calm person is struggling, they often have nowhere to fully fall apart themselves. This emotional imbalance slowly becomes exhausting. At first, it may even feel meaningful. Being trusted feels beautiful. Being emotionally dependable creates connection. Calm people often genuinely love helping others feel emotionally safe because they understand what emotional pain feels like deeply. But over time, they begin unconsciously neglecting their own need for emotional safety, and this usually happens quietly. They become so focused on protecting others emotionally that they stop asking an important question. Who protects me? Who allows me to rest emotionally? Who notices when I am tired? Who creates safety for me too? Many calm people struggle deeply with receiving emotional care because they became too used to being the giver. Their nervous system became organized around emotional support, not emotional receiving. So even when someone asks how they are doing, they often instinctively minimize themselves. I'm fine. I'll be okay. It's nothing. Meanwhile, inside, they may feel deeply overwhelmed. Buddhist wisdom teaches that balance is necessary for inner peace, but emotionally calm people often live in deep imbalance because emotional energy constantly flows outward while very little comes back inward. They absorb emotions, comfort people, regulate tension, hold space, support everyone, but rarely allow themselves to fully lean emotionally on anyone else, and eventually this creates profound emotional loneliness. Not loneliness from lack of people, but loneliness from lack of emotional refuge. Some calm people secretly carry the belief that they are not allowed to need too much. Maybe they learned this early in life. Perhaps they grew up in emotionally unstable environments where their role became keeping peace, staying mature, or taking care of others emotionally. Over time, they learned something dangerous. Safety comes from being emotionally useful. So instead of learning how to receive care, they learned how to provide it. And because they became so good at it, people naturally began relying on them more and more. This is why calm people often attract emotionally wounded individuals. Their energy feels soothing, their patience feels safe, their emotional steadiness feels healing. People feel emotionally held around them. But being emotionally safe for others does not automatically mean you feel emotionally safe yourself. In fact, many calm people secretly live in a constant state of emotional self-protection. They carefully manage their emotions, filter their words, suppress their needs, stay composed during emotional pain, not because they are truly at peace, but because vulnerability feels unfamiliar or unsafe. This creates a painful contradiction. Everyone feels safe with them, but they rarely feel safe enough to fully be themselves. Buddhist teachings speak deeply about awareness because suffering often hides beneath appearances. Calmness can look peaceful externally while hiding enormous emotional exhaustion internally. Some people appear emotionally stable because they learned how to hide emotional pain exceptionally well. And the frightening part is that nobody questions it because calm people rarely create emotional disruption. They continue functioning, continue supporting, continue listening, continue carrying, all while silently craving emotional safety themselves. One of the hardest things for calm people to admit is that they often feel uncomfortable needing support. The moment they begin struggling emotionally, shame appears quickly. I should be able to handle this. I don't want to burden anyone. Other people need help more than I do. These thoughts reveal how deeply self-abandonment became normalized inside them, because somewhere along the journey, they unconsciously decided that their role was to provide emotional shelter, not to seek it. This emotional pattern becomes especially dangerous because calm people are often surrounded by emotionally dependent relationships. Others become so used to receiving comfort from them that they stop noticing the calm person's emotional needs entirely. Not always intentionally. Sometimes people simply adapt to the emotional roles around them. If you always appear emotionally composed, others assume you need less care. If you always handle problems quietly, others assume you are okay. If you constantly support everyone else, people unconsciously focus their emotional attention elsewhere. And over time, the calm person slowly disappears beneath the role they created. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that attachment to identity creates suffering. And many calm people become deeply attached to the identity of being emotionally stable. The safe one, the understanding one, the grounded one. But every identity becomes painful when it prevents authenticity. Because calm people are human too. They feel fear too, exhaustion too, loneliness too, confusion too. But many of them no longer know how to express these emotions openly because emotional control became their survival strategy. Some calm people even feel guilty when they finally reach emotional limits. They become ashamed of needing rest, ashamed of emotional fatigue, ashamed of wanting space from people who constantly depend on them. But emotional exhaustion is not selfishness. It is the nervous system begging for balance. There is also another painful reality many calm people face. They often become emotionally available for others, while emotionally unavailable to themselves. They know how to comfort others beautifully, but do not know how to comfort their own inner child. They know how to create emotional safety for everyone else, but rarely create emotional softness inside their own mind. Instead, they judge themselves harshly, push themselves constantly, suppress emotions quickly, expect themselves to keep functioning no matter how tired they become. And over time, they begin treating themselves like emotional machines instead of human beings. This is why calm people often feel deeply tired in ways sleep cannot fix. Their exhaustion is not only physical, it is emotional depletion from years of carrying others while neglecting their own inner safety. Buddhist teachings often emphasize compassion directed inward as well as outward. Self-compassion matters because without it, even kindness becomes draining. Yet many calm people give compassion to everyone except themselves. They forgive others easily while remaining hard on themselves. They offer patience to others while demanding perfection from themselves. They create emotional softness for everyone else while internally living with emotional pressure constantly. This imbalance slowly erodes inner peace. One painful sign that calm people forgot to seek safety themselves is emotional hyper-independence. They begin believing they must handle everything alone. Asking for help feels uncomfortable. Depending on others feels risky. Receiving emotional care feels unnatural. So they continue carrying everything privately, even when overwhelmed, even when lonely, even when emotionally drowning. And because they rarely express emotional need openly, nobody fully realizes how much they are struggling. This creates silent suffering, the kind that hides behind smiles, kindness, emotional intelligence, and composure. Many calm people also become experts at emotionally disappearing in relationships. They become so focused on making others feel emotionally secure that they stop taking up emotional space themselves. They avoid conflict, avoid asking for too much, Avoid expressing needs clearly. Avoid vulnerability that might make others uncomfortable. And slowly they shrink emotionally inside relationships where everyone else feels emotionally held while they remain emotionally unseen. Buddhist wisdom teaches presence, but calm people often become emotionally absent from themselves while being deeply present for everyone else. This creates deep internal grief. Grief for the care they never received. Grief for the emotional safety they keep giving away but rarely experience themselves. Grief for the years spent being strong while secretly needing softness too. One reason calm people forget to seek safety is because they became addicted to emotional usefulness. Being needed makes them feel valuable, so they unconsciously continue attracting relationships where they are the caretaker, healer, listener, or emotional stabilizer. But relationships built only on emotional giving eventually become emotionally lonely. Because every human soul needs somewhere to rest honestly, not perform, not support, not carry. Rest. Many calm people secretly long for relationships where they do not have to monitor emotions constantly. Relationships where they can finally stop being the strong one. Relationships where they can cry without apologizing, struggle without shame, and receive comfort without guilt. But receiving safety requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels terrifying for people who survived life by becoming emotionally composed. This is why Buddhist teachings about surrender are so powerful. Surrender does not mean weakness. It means finally allowing yourself to stop controlling everything emotionally. Stop carrying everything. Stop protecting everyone. Stop being emotionally on duty constantly. Because no human being can endlessly function as emotional shelter for others without eventually collapsing internally. Even the calmest soul needs somewhere safe to rest, needs someone who asks deeper questions, someone who notices exhaustion, someone who says, "You do not have to carry everything alone." And perhaps one of the most healing realizations calm people can experience is understanding this truth. Their value does not come from how much emotional weight they can carry for others. They deserve safety too, deserve comfort too, deserve softness too, deserve support too. And healing finally begins the moment they stop asking, "How can I continue being strong for everyone else?" and begin asking something much more honest. Where do I finally feel safe enough to stop being strong for a while? And maybe that is the moment many calm people finally begin realizing how deeply tired they truly are. Not just tired from work, responsibilities, or life itself, but tired from constantly becoming emotional shelter for everyone around them. Tired from always listening, always understanding, always absorbing, always carrying. Tired from being the place where everyone else empties their pain while quietly having nowhere safe to empty their own. And this is one of the heaviest emotional burdens a person can carry. Becoming everyone's emotional container. There is a certain kind of person others naturally run toward when life becomes painful. The calm listener, the emotionally grounded friend, the patient partner, the person who knows how to stay soft even when others are overwhelmed. People feel safe opening their hearts around them because they do not judge quickly. They know how to sit with emotions. They know how to comfort. They know how to hold emotional space gently. But over time, this gift slowly becomes heavy because people begin pouring everything into them. Their fears, their grief, their anger, their anxiety, their confusion, their heartbreak, their emotional chaos. And while the calm person continues holding everyone carefully, nobody notices how full they are becoming inside. This is the hidden burden of being an emotional container. You absorb so much emotional weight from others that eventually you no longer know where their pain ends and your exhaustion begins. At first, being emotionally available may feel meaningful. You feel trusted, needed, important. People tell you things they tell nobody else. They rely on your calmness during difficult moments. And because your heart genuinely cares, you continue making space for them again and again. But slowly, the emotional weight accumulates. One painful conversation becomes 10. One emotional crisis becomes constant emotional responsibility. One moment of support becomes an identity built around carrying everyone else. And eventually, your nervous system begins collapsing under emotional overload. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment creates suffering, and many emotionally burdened people become attached to being emotionally useful. Their value begins feeling connected to how much pain they can hold for others. They unconsciously believe their purpose is to absorb emotional suffering quietly. But no human being was designed to endlessly carry everyone else's emotional pain without consequence. The soul eventually becomes tired. Many emotional containers do not realize how deeply affected they are because they became so used to functioning while emotionally overwhelmed. They continue going through daily life normally while carrying layers of emotional heaviness inside them. Other people feel relief after talking, but the emotional container feels heavier afterward. Not because they do not care, but because every conversation leaves emotional residue inside the nervous system. The sadness stays, the tension stays, the emotional energy stays. And because calm people rarely stop to process their own emotions properly, all of this emotional weight slowly accumulates beneath the surface. This is why many emotionally sensitive people feel exhausted even after doing nothing. Their body is carrying emotional energy constantly. Their nervous system rarely rests because they are continuously emotionally open to everyone around them. They absorb moods quickly. Notice emotional tension immediately. Carry conversations in their mind afterward. Replay painful things others told them. Worry deeply about people's struggles. And over time, their inner world becomes crowded with emotions that do not fully belong to them. Buddhist teachings emphasize awareness because awareness helps separate your suffering from the suffering of others. But emotional containers often lose this separation completely. They become emotionally fused with everyone around them. Someone else's anxiety becomes their anxiety. Someone else's sadness enters their chest. Someone else's emotional instability disturbs their inner peace. And slowly, they stop living emotionally from within themselves and begin living emotionally through everyone else's emotional state. This creates chronic nervous system exhaustion. One of the saddest parts of being everyone's emotional container is that people often leave emotionally lighter while you quietly carry the heaviness alone afterward. You comfort others while suppressing your own exhaustion. You reassure people while privately feeling emotionally drained. You remain calm while your own nervous system slowly becomes overloaded. And because you are good at holding space, people continue bringing more pain, more emotional chaos, more unresolved wounds, until your inner world barely has room to breathe anymore. Many emotional containers secretly feel emotionally suffocated, but they do not know how to stop. Saying no feels selfish. Pulling away feels cruel. Creating emotional distance feels uncomfortable because they built their identity around being emotionally available. So they continue giving, continue listening, continue carrying, even while their soul quietly begs for silence. There are people who spend years becoming emotional homes for others while secretly feeling emotionally homeless themselves. Everyone feels safe with them, but they rarely feel safe enough to fully collapse emotionally anywhere themselves. This creates deep emotional loneliness, because carrying everyone else's emotions leaves very little space for your own emotional truth. Some emotional containers eventually become numb without realizing it. Not because they stopped caring, but because emotional overload forced the nervous system into self-protection. After absorbing years of emotional pain from others, the body begins shutting down emotionally just to survive. Joy becomes muted. Rest feels incomplete. Conversations feel draining. Solitude becomes necessary just to breathe again. This emotional numbness often confuses people because externally they still appear calm, compassionate, and emotionally intelligent. But internally, they are exhausted from constantly holding emotional weight that was never fully theirs to carry. Buddhist wisdom teaches compassion, but it also teaches non-attachment. This balance matters deeply. Compassion allows you to care about suffering. Non-attachment prevents you from drowning inside it. Emotional containers often have compassion without emotional boundaries. They absorb instead of witnessing, carry instead of supporting, internalize instead of observing, and eventually their peace disappears beneath the emotional needs of everyone around them. One painful reason emotional containers struggle setting boundaries is because they fear disappointing people. They fear becoming emotionally unavailable. They fear others seeing them differently if they stop carrying so much. But boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries protect the nervous system from emotional collapse. Without boundaries, emotionally sensitive people slowly become storage spaces for everyone else's unresolved emotions. And eventually, the body begins reacting. Anxiety, burnout, mental exhaustion, difficulty sleeping, emotional fatigue, irritability. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed from constantly processing emotional energy. Many emotional containers also struggle with guilt whenever they prioritize themselves emotionally. The moment they stop responding quickly, stop emotionally rescuing others, or take space for themselves, anxiety appears immediately. Why? Because their identity became built around emotional availability. They unconsciously believe love means constant emotional access. But Buddhist wisdom reminds us that attachment to roles creates suffering, and emotional containers often become trapped inside the role of the listener, the helper, the calm one, or the emotionally strong person. Eventually, they stop feeling like human beings and start feeling like emotional service providers, always available, always supportive, always emotionally stable. Meanwhile, their own emotional needs remain quietly ignored. One painful truth many emotional containers must eventually face is this: some people only come to them for emotional release, not emotional reciprocity. People unload, venting, crying, complaining, seeking comfort, but rarely ask deeper questions about how the emotional container is actually doing themselves. Not always out of selfishness, sometimes because the emotional container trained everyone to focus away from them emotionally. They became too good at hiding pain, too good at appearing stable, too good at carrying everything quietly. And over time, people unconsciously stopped seeing them as someone who needs care too. This creates quiet grief inside the soul. The grief of constantly emotionally holding others while feeling emotionally unseen yourself. Many emotional containers secretly fantasize about disappearing for a while, not because they hate people, but because their nervous system craves relief from emotional heaviness constantly surrounding them. They want silence, stillness, space, freedom from emotional responsibility, freedom from everyone needing something emotionally from them. And yet, even during rest, many emotional containers remain emotionally alert. They worry about people, think about conversations, replay emotional moments, carry unresolved feelings internally. Their mind rarely fully relaxes because they became emotionally conditioned to monitor and carry emotional energy constantly. This is why solitude becomes sacred for many emotionally sensitive people. Solitude is often the only place where external emotional demands stop temporarily. But even solitude cannot fully heal emotional overload if you continue reopening yourself endlessly without protection. Buddhist monks often retreat into silence, not because they reject humanity, but because they understand the nervous system needs spaciousness. Emotional energy affects the mind deeply. Constant emotional exposure without inner stillness creates suffering. Emotional containers rarely give themselves enough stillness. Their emotional doors remain open constantly, and eventually exhaustion becomes unavoidable. One dangerous habit emotional containers develop is over-identifying with other people's pain. They feel responsible for healing everyone, responsible for comforting everyone, responsible for emotionally stabilizing everyone around them. But this creates impossible emotional pressure. You cannot carry everyone's suffering and remain emotionally healthy yourself. The Buddha understood this deeply. Compassion does not mean emotional absorption. It means presence without possession, care without emotional drowning. Many emotionally exhausted people never learned this distinction, so they continue absorbing pain endlessly while calling it love. Meanwhile, their nervous system slowly collapses beneath emotional overload. There is also another painful effect of being everyone's emotional container. You begin neglecting your own emotional processing entirely. Since your attention constantly moves toward everyone else's struggles, your own emotions remain unprocessed in the background. Your sadness waits, your grief waits, your exhaustion waits, your unmet needs wait, until eventually everything inside you becomes emotionally crowded. And then one day, even a small emotional trigger suddenly feels overwhelming because your nervous system is already carrying years of emotional buildup underneath it. This is why emotional containers sometimes break down unexpectedly after appearing fine for so long. The emotional weight finally became too much. Buddhist wisdom teaches awareness because suffering deepens whenever emotional reality is ignored, and emotional containers often ignore their own suffering while endlessly focusing on everyone else's. But healing begins the moment you realize something important. You are not required to become emotional storage for the entire world. You are allowed to care without carrying everything, allowed to support without absorbing, allowed to listen without losing yourself, allowed to love people without abandoning your nervous system in the process. And perhaps one of the most freeing moments in emotional healing comes when the emotional container finally understands this truth deeply. Their heart was never meant to become a place where everyone else unloads pain while they quietly collapse under the weight of it alone. Their heart deserves peace too, and maybe that is where the deepest shift finally begins. After years of hiding pain behind silence, suppressing emotional truth to protect others, and quietly carrying suffering alone, something inside the exhausted soul slowly begins waking up. A realization that changes everything. Compassion was never supposed to require your disappearance. Love was never meant to demand emotional self-erasure. And peace was never meant to come from abandoning yourself so everyone else could remain comfortable. This is where one of the most powerful Buddhist lessons begins, the lesson of right compassion without self-erasure. There is a form of compassion that heals people, and there is another form that slowly destroys the person giving it. At first, they can look almost identical. Both appear kind, patient, generous, loving. Both involve helping others, understanding pain, and offering emotional support. But deep underneath the surface, they come from completely different places. One compassion is rooted in wisdom. The other is rooted in fear, guilt, emotional conditioning, or self-abandonment. And many emotionally exhausted people spend years confusing the two. Right compassion in Buddhist wisdom does not mean endlessly sacrificing your nervous system for others. It does not mean constantly carrying emotional burdens that destroy your peace. It does not mean abandoning your emotional truth to maintain harmony. True compassion includes awareness of yourself too. This is one of the hardest things emotionally burdened people struggle to accept because they were taught that goodness means self-sacrifice. They learn to feel valuable through emotional giving, through helping, through understanding, through carrying pain quietly. But over time, their compassion lost balance. They stopped noticing themselves completely. They comforted others while ignoring their own exhaustion, supported others while neglecting their own emotional wounds, protected everyone else emotionally while leaving themselves unprotected internally. And eventually, compassion turned into quiet suffering. Buddhist teachings emphasize the middle way because extremes always create suffering. Too much emotional detachment creates coldness, but too much emotional absorption creates exhaustion. Right compassion exists in balance. It allows you to care deeply without losing yourself completely inside another person's pain. This balance is life-changing because many emotionally sensitive people secretly believe that protecting themselves emotionally means becoming selfish. The moment they think about setting boundaries, taking space, or prioritizing their own peace, guilt immediately appears. They think, what if they need me? What if I hurt them? What if I seem cold? So instead of choosing balance, they continue overgiving emotionally until their spirit becomes depleted. But compassion without self-respect slowly becomes self-destruction. One painful reason emotionally caring people erase themselves is because they unconsciously tie love to emotional usefulness. They feel safest when needed, valuable when helping, important when carrying others emotionally. This often begins in childhood. A child may learn that love comes through being emotionally easy, mature, helpful, or supportive. Maybe they comforted emotionally unstable parents. Maybe they became the peacemaker in the family. Maybe their own emotions were ignored while everyone else's emotions controlled the household atmosphere. Over time, they learned something dangerous. To be loved, I must take care of others emotionally. This belief follows them into adulthood quietly. Now they constantly overextend themselves emotionally, listen endlessly, rescue constantly, carry everyone's pain, all while quietly neglecting their own inner world. And because society often praises self-sacrifice, nobody notices the damage immediately. People admire their kindness, their patience, their calmness, but very few ask whether their compassion is emotionally sustainable. Buddhist wisdom asks a deeper question. Is your compassion creating peace inside you, or destroying your peace slowly? That question changes everything. Because true compassion should not require chronic exhaustion. It should not require emotional self-erasure. It should not require abandoning your nervous system entirely for the sake of others. One of the most important Buddhist truths emotionally burdened people must learn is this: you are not separate from the compassion you give. Your suffering matters too. Many caring people unconsciously treat themselves as less deserving of tenderness than everyone else. They offer patience outward while criticizing themselves harshly inwardly. They forgive others quickly while remaining emotionally demanding toward themselves. This imbalance creates quiet suffering. Right compassion includes the self, not selfishness, not narcissism, not emotional coldness, but recognition that your humanity matters too. Your exhaustion matters too. Your emotional limits matter too. Many emotionally exhausted people secretly fear that if they stop overgiving emotionally, they will lose connection, purpose, or love. But often what they lose is not real love. What they lose are unhealthy emotional dynamics built on overfunctioning. This can feel terrifying because people may resist when you stop abandoning yourself for them emotionally. Some people become uncomfortable when you set boundaries. Some may accuse you of changing. Some may feel frustrated when you stop carrying emotional weight that belongs to them. But Buddhist wisdom reminds us that attachment to approval creates suffering. If your compassion exists only to keep others comfortable, it is no longer rooted in truth. Right. Compassion sometimes disappoints people, not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. Sometimes the compassionate thing is saying no. Sometimes the compassionate thing is stepping back. Sometimes the compassionate thing is allowing others to experience consequences, discomfort, or emotional responsibility without rescuing them immediately. This does not make you heartless. It makes your compassion healthy. Many emotionally burdened people do not realize how deeply fear controls their kindness. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of abandonment, fear of being misunderstood. So they continue giving endlessly, not from peace, but from emotional survival. Buddhist teachings encourage awareness because awareness reveals motivation clearly. The moment you honestly ask yourself, why do I struggle to stop overgiving emotionally? Deeper truths often appear. Sometimes the answer is love. But sometimes the answer is fear of no longer feeling needed. And this realization can feel deeply painful. Because many calm people built their identity around emotional caregiving. They became the listener, the healer, the emotionally stable person everyone depends on. But identities built on self-abandonment eventually become emotional prisons. One of the most healing shifts happens when you realize compassion does not require carrying everything. You can love someone without absorbing their suffering. You can support someone without destroying your peace. You can care deeply without emotionally drowning. This is what Buddhist wisdom calls wise compassion. Compassion with awareness. Compassion with balance. Compassion that includes the self. Many emotionally exhausted people also struggle with receiving compassion themselves. They know how to give emotional safety beautifully, but receiving support feels uncomfortable. Vulnerability feels unfamiliar. They instinctively move back into caretaker mode because giving feels emotionally safer than receiving. But right compassion allows reciprocity. It allows you to receive too. Receive rest, receive care, receive understanding, receive emotional space without guilt. This can feel deeply unnatural for people who survived life by becoming emotionally strong and emotionally useful. But healing requires allowing yourself to become human again instead of constantly performing emotional resilience. Buddhist teachings often emphasize non-attachment because attachment creates suffering. Many emotionally burdened people become attached to being the good person, the endlessly patient person, the endlessly understanding person, the endlessly available person. But when goodness requires emotional self-destruction, it is no longer balanced compassion. It becomes emotional martyrdom. And emotional martyrdom always leads to suffering eventually. One painful sign that compassion has become self-erasure is emotional resentment hidden beneath kindness. You continue helping while secretly feeling exhausted. Continue giving while privately wishing someone would finally take care of you too. This resentment does not mean you are bad. It means your nervous system has been neglected for too long. The soul was never meant to survive endless emotional output without nourishment. Buddhist monks retreat into silence and solitude, not because they reject compassion, but because they understand something emotionally exhausted people often forget. Inner stillness must be protected. Compassion without inner stillness eventually collapses into burnout. This is why right compassion requires boundaries. Boundaries are not punishment. They are protection for the nervous system, protection for inner peace, protection against emotional disappearance. Without boundaries, compassionate people slowly become emotionally consumed by the suffering around them, and eventually they lose connection with themselves completely. Many emotionally burdened people secretly believe love means enduring pain quietly. They stay in draining relationships too long, tolerate emotional imbalance too long, continue carrying people who refuse to carry themselves, because they think compassion means infinite endurance. But Buddhism never teaches endless self-neglect. It teaches wisdom, and wisdom understands something important. Compassion becomes unhealthy the moment it consistently requires betrayal of your own emotional truth. You are allowed to protect your peace, allowed to rest, allowed to say no, allowed to stop emotionally rescuing everyone around you, allowed to let your own needs matter too. This realization often creates enormous guilt at first because emotionally exhausted people are so used to prioritizing everyone else's emotional world. But slowly, something beautiful begins happening. The nervous system relaxes, the soul breathes, the body stops living in constant emotional alertness. Because right compassion no longer requires emotional self-sacrifice every second. One of the deepest Buddhist lessons is understanding that suffering grows when attachment blinds us to reality, and many emotionally burdened people became attached to the belief that love means constant emotional availability. But real love includes honesty, includes limits, includes mutual care, includes emotional balance. Right compassion does not ask you to disappear. It does not ask you to become emotionally empty while everyone else receives your energy endlessly. It asks you to remain awake. Awake to your own suffering too. Awake to your own limits too. Awake to the truth that your peace matters just as much as anyone else's peace. And perhaps healing finally begins the moment you stop asking yourself, "How much more can I give?" and begin asking a different question entirely. What would compassion look like if I finally included myself in it too? And maybe that is the moment the exhausted soul finally begins understanding something it spent years avoiding. Compassion without balance slowly drains the spirit. The constant need to help, fix, rescue, support, calm, explain, and emotionally carry others may look loving from the outside, but deep inside, something fragile begins weakening quietly. Because when your entire life becomes centered around holding everyone else together, eventually you stop knowing how to hold yourself together at all. And this is where another painful truth begins to reveal itself. Overfunctioning for others slowly weakens your own spirit. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. A heaviness that does not come from physical work alone, but from constantly carrying emotional responsibility for people who should also be learning how to carry themselves. Many emotionally burdened people spend years over-functioning without even realizing it. They become the emotional problem solvers, the helpers, the caretakers, the stabilizers, the ones who always step in before things fall apart. At first, this behavior often feels meaningful. You feel useful, needed, valuable. You become the person people depend on during emotional chaos. And because helping others gives you a sense of purpose, you continue stepping into that role again and again. But slowly, your entire nervous system becomes organized around responsibility. Responsibility for other people's emotions, other people's comfort, other people's healing, other people's stability, and eventually your spirit becomes exhausted from carrying a weight it was never meant to carry alone. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment creates suffering, and many over-functioning people become deeply attached to being needed. Their identity becomes tied to usefulness. If they are helping, fixing, or supporting others, they feel valuable. But when they stop helping, discomfort appears quickly. They feel guilty resting, guilty saying no, guilty stepping back emotionally, because somewhere deep inside, they learned something dangerous. My worth comes from what I do for others emotionally. This belief slowly destroys inner peace, because the spirit was never designed to earn love through constant emotional labor. Overfunctioning often begins very early in life. A child growing up in emotional instability may unconsciously become the responsible one. They learn to read moods carefully, learn to calm tension, learn to become emotionally mature too early because chaos around them feels unsafe. Over time, helping becomes survival, fixing becomes identity, carrying others becomes normal. And as adults, they continue over-functioning automatically in relationships, friendships, family systems, and even workplaces. They become the one who remembers everything, handles everything, supports everyone, repairs every emotional rupture, solves everyone's problems. Meanwhile, their own emotional world quietly begins collapsing beneath the pressure. One of the most painful things about overfunctioning is that people often reward it. Society praises self-sacrifice. People admire the person who always shows up, the dependable one, the endlessly giving one, the strong one who handles everything quietly. But nobody asks whether constantly carrying everyone else is slowly destroying that person internally. Because overfunctioning creates chronic emotional exhaustion. You become emotionally responsible for things that were never fully yours to manage. If someone struggles, you rush to rescue them. If someone is upset, you try to regulate their emotions. If someone avoids responsibility, you compensate by doing more. And little by little, your life becomes emotionally centered around preventing discomfort for everyone else. This creates enormous nervous system pressure because human beings cannot fully control other people's lives, emotions, or healing journeys. Yet overfunctioning people try anyway. Not because they are controlling in a cruel way, but because they fear what will happen if they stop holding everything together. Buddhist teachings emphasize balance because imbalance always creates suffering eventually. And overfunctioning is deeply imbalanced. Your energy constantly flows outward while your own spirit becomes neglected. The body eventually notices fatigue, burnout, irritability, emotional numbness, anxiety, difficulty resting, a nervous system permanently stuck in emotional alertness. Many over-functioning people secretly feel exhausted by everyone around them, but then immediately feel guilty for feeling that exhaustion. They think, I should be more patient or I should be stronger. But the truth is simple. The soul becomes weak when it is constantly overextended. Not weak in character, weak in energy, weak in emotional stability, weak in connection with itself. There is a huge difference between helping from peace and helping from compulsion. Healthy compassion comes from fullness. Overfunctioning comes from fear, conditioning, guilt, or emotional survival patterns. One helps freely, the other feels unable to stop. Many emotionally burdened people do not know how to relax because their nervous system became addicted to responsibility. Even during quiet moments, part of them remains emotionally on duty, watching, monitoring, planning, fixing, worrying about everyone else. And because they spent years functioning this way, they no longer recognize how deeply exhausted their spirit has become. Buddhist wisdom teaches awareness, because unconscious patterns quietly shape suffering. Overfunctioning becomes especially dangerous because it often looks like kindness from the outside. But inside, it slowly erodes emotional freedom. You stop living your own life fully because so much energy goes into managing everyone else's. Your dreams get postponed. Your rest gets postponed. Your healing gets postponed. Your emotional needs get postponed. Everything about you slowly moves into the background, while everyone else's emotional world takes center stage. And eventually, the soul begins feeling invisible to itself. Many over-functioning people also struggle with control without realizing it. They fear letting people fail, struggle, or feel consequences naturally because chaos feels emotionally unsafe inside them. So they overhelp, over-explain, over-give, over-carry. Not because others are incapable, but because watching discomfort triggers anxiety inside their own nervous system. This is why overfunctioning becomes spiritually exhausting. You are constantly fighting reality itself, trying to prevent all pain, trying to hold everyone together, trying to manage emotional outcomes. But life cannot be controlled completely, and the more you try carrying everyone emotionally, the more disconnected you become from your own inner center. Buddhist teachings about non-attachment become deeply important here. Non-attachment does not mean not caring. It means understanding that you are not responsible for controlling every outcome around you. You can love people without carrying their entire life. You can support people without becoming emotionally consumed by them. You can care without abandoning yourself. This lesson feels terrifying for over-functioning people because stopping feels unsafe. If they stop helping constantly, they fear everything will collapse. But often, what actually collapses is the unhealthy dynamic itself, and sometimes that collapse is necessary. One painful truth many over-functioning people must eventually face is this: some people never learn emotional responsibility because someone else keeps over-functioning for them. If you always rescue, others may never grow. If you always carry emotional weight, others may never learn accountability. If you constantly compensate for other people's lack of effort, balance disappears completely. Meanwhile, your spirit grows weaker and weaker beneath exhaustion. This weakness often appears quietly. You stop feeling joy deeply. Simple tasks feel emotionally heavy. You feel drained around people. Rest never feels fully restorative. Your body becomes tired in ways difficult to explain. Because over-functioning drains life force slowly. The spirit needs spaciousness to remain healthy. It needs stillness, boundaries, emotional reciprocity, time to simply exist without constantly fixing or carrying others. But over-functioning people rarely allow themselves this space because productivity and emotional usefulness became tied to identity. If they are not helping, they feel anxious. If they are not needed, they feel uncertain. If they rest, guilt appears. This is emotional conditioning, not peace. Buddhist monks often practice letting go precisely because attachment to endless doing creates suffering. Stillness reveals how addicted the mind becomes to emotional labor. Many over-functioning people secretly do not know who they are outside of helping others. Their identity became built entirely around caretaking. So when they finally stop, emptiness appears. But this emptiness is not failure. It is the beginning of rediscovering yourself beyond emotional service. One of the saddest effects of over-functioning is resentment hidden beneath kindness. You continue helping while secretly feeling depleted. Continue carrying while privately wishing someone would finally carry you too. And because over-functioning people rarely express this resentment honestly, it stays trapped inside the body. The nervous system becomes heavier, more irritable, more emotionally tired, more detached from joy. Not because they stopped loving people, but because their spirit has been overused for too long. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that right action includes balance. Helping others should not require destroying yourself. Real compassion strengthens the spirit instead of draining it completely. This is why healthy boundaries are spiritual protection. Boundaries protect energy, protect clarity, protect peace. Without them, over-functioning slowly consumes the soul. Many emotionally exhausted people fear becoming selfish if they stop over-giving. But there is a difference between selfishness and self-preservation. Selfishness ignores others completely. Self-preservation remembers that you matter too. This distinction changes everything. Because over-functioning people often treat themselves like emotional machines instead of human beings. They expect themselves to keep giving endlessly regardless of exhaustion. But the human spirit cannot survive endless output without nourishment. Eventually, the soul begins shutting down. This is why some people suddenly lose motivation after years of overcarrying everyone emotionally. Their spirit became tired of surviving through constant emotional labor. One powerful Buddhist lesson is understanding that suffering increases whenever you resist the natural limits of being human. You are not meant to hold everyone together forever. You are not meant to rescue every person emotionally. You are not meant to sacrifice your nervous system to prove love. You are human too. You need rest too, need emotional support too, need stillness too, need space where you are not constantly responsible for everyone else's emotional world. And perhaps one of the deepest moments of healing begins when the over-functioning person finally realizes something life-changing. Their spirit does not become stronger by carrying everyone endlessly. It becomes stronger the moment they finally stop abandoning themselves in the process of trying to save everyone else. And perhaps this is the part that hurts the most for many emotionally exhausted people. After spending years showing up for everyone, supporting everyone, listening to everyone, and carrying everyone emotionally, they quietly realize something deeply painful. Even though many people depend on them, they still feel incredibly alone inside. There is a loneliness that has nothing to do with being physically alone. A loneliness that can exist in crowded rooms, inside relationships, inside families, even while your phone is constantly full of messages from people needing something from you emotionally. And this loneliness is especially common among calm people, caregivers, listeners, and emotionally dependable souls. Because being needed is not the same thing as being emotionally seen. Many emotionally burdened people spend years becoming emotional support systems for others. People trust them with secrets, pain, fears, heartbreak, confusion, and emotional struggles. They become the safe person everyone runs toward during difficult moments. And because they genuinely care, they continue opening their heart again and again. But slowly, something painful begins happening beneath the surface. Everyone feels close to them, but they do not feel deeply known by anyone. This creates a very specific kind of loneliness, the loneliness of always being emotionally available while rarely feeling emotionally held yourself. At first, many calm people do not fully notice this emptiness. Being needed feels meaningful. It creates purpose, importance, connection. But over time, they begin realizing that most relationships revolve around what they provide emotionally, rather than who they truly are beneath the emotional role. People come to them for comfort, for advice, for stability, for understanding. But very few people stop long enough to ask deeper questions about them. Very few notice the exhaustion beneath the calmness, the sadness beneath the patience, the emotional hunger hidden beneath the strength. And because calm people often hide their own pain so well, others assume they are fine. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment to roles creates suffering, and many emotionally dependable people become trapped inside the role of the strong one, the safe one, or the emotionally stable one. Over time, people begin relating to the role instead of the human being underneath it. This is why someone can feel deeply needed yet emotionally invisible at the same time. People know what you do for them emotionally, but they may not know your real fears, your private exhaustion, your emotional wounds, your loneliness. And perhaps the saddest part is that calm people often participate in this invisibility themselves. They become so used to supporting others that they stop revealing themselves honestly. They listen more than they speak, comfort more than they confess, hold space more than they take up space, and eventually relationships become emotionally one-sided without anyone fully noticing. This emotional loneliness becomes especially painful because it often hides behind connection. From the outside, calm people may seem socially loved, emotionally valued, and deeply connected to others. But internally, they may feel profoundly alone, not because nobody cares, but because very few people truly reach them emotionally. Many emotionally dependable people secretly long for someone who notices without needing explanation, someone who asks deeper questions, someone who sees through the calmness and recognizes the emotional weight quietly being carried underneath it. But because they became experts at hiding pain, people rarely see how much support they need too. This creates silent emotional starvation. You keep feeding others emotionally while your own soul quietly goes hungry. One painful reason this loneliness develops is because emotionally burdened people often struggle receiving vulnerability themselves. They know how to support others, but allowing themselves to fully depend emotionally on someone else feels unfamiliar or unsafe. Maybe they learned early in life that depending on others leads to disappointment. Maybe they became emotionally independent too young. Maybe nobody emotionally held them consistently when they were younger, so they learned to survive without asking for much. Over time, they became emotionally self-contained, and while emotional independence may look strong externally, deep inside it can create enormous loneliness, because human beings were never meant to carry life entirely alone emotionally. Buddhist teachings emphasize interconnectedness because human suffering becomes heavier when carried in isolation. But many emotionally strong people isolate their pain automatically, not intentionally, habitually. When they struggle, they withdraw quietly. When they hurt, they minimize it. When they feel lonely, they distract themselves by helping others again. This creates an endless cycle where they continue giving connection outward while remaining emotionally disconnected inward. One painful sign of this loneliness is feeling emotionally tired after constantly being around people, not because you dislike people, but because every interaction revolves around emotional output. Listening, comforting, supporting, stabilizing. Very little emotional nourishment flows back toward you, and eventually relationships begin feeling emotionally draining instead of emotionally restorative. The nervous system notices this imbalance, even if the mind tries to ignore it. Buddhist wisdom teaches awareness because awareness reveals hidden suffering, and many calm people hide their loneliness even from themselves. They stay busy helping others because helping creates temporary emotional distraction. As long as someone else needs support, they do not have to fully face the emptiness growing inside them. But eventually, quiet moments begin revealing the truth. The silence feels heavier. The exhaustion feels deeper. The emotional hunger becomes impossible to ignore. Many emotionally dependable people also confuse being valued for being understood. But these are not always the same thing. People may value your emotional support deeply while still not truly understanding your inner world. They may appreciate your strength while never seeing your vulnerability. They may depend on your calmness while never realizing how lonely it feels to always be the emotionally stable one. This is why emotional loneliness can exist even inside loving relationships. If your role always centers around supporting others emotionally, eventually you begin feeling more like emotional infrastructure than a fully seen human being. Buddhist teachings often speak about suffering created by attachment to identity, and many emotionally exhausted people became attached to being useful because usefulness felt safer than vulnerability. If they are helping, they feel needed. If they are needed, they feel connected. But connection built only on emotional usefulness becomes fragile because it often lacks mutual emotional exposure. Real connection requires being seen fully, not just for what you provide, but for who you are underneath the role. And this is terrifying for many calm people because being emotionally seen requires vulnerability. It requires saying, "I'm tired too. I need support too. I feel lonely too." For someone used to always being the helper, these truths can feel deeply uncomfortable because somewhere deep inside, they fear becoming emotionally too much. So instead, they continue carrying loneliness silently. Many emotionally burdened people also unconsciously attract relationships where they are needed more than known. Emotionally wounded people naturally feel safe around calm souls. And because calm people know how to hold emotional space beautifully, they often become emotional anchors in relationships. But anchors rarely get carried themselves. They remain in place while everyone else leans on them. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion hidden beneath love. You care deeply about people, but secretly wish someone would notice how much you are carrying too. One of the saddest moments happens when emotionally dependable people realize they do not know how to ask for emotional support anymore. Their needs became so suppressed that vulnerability itself feels unnatural. Even when someone offers help, they instinctively say, "I'm okay. I'll handle it. It's nothing." Because emotional self-reliance became survival, but self-reliance without emotional intimacy creates spiritual loneliness. The soul begins aching for somewhere safe to finally rest honestly, not perform strength, not provide wisdom, not carry everyone else emotionally, just rest. Buddhist monks often emphasize stillness and inner truth because loneliness deepens whenever the authentic self remains hidden. Many emotionally exhausted people are lonely because nobody truly knows their real inner world. People know the composed version, the emotionally regulated version, the supportive version, but not the hidden grief, not the fear, not the emotional exhaustion, not the silent ache for reciprocity. This hidden loneliness becomes especially painful because calm people often feel guilty for feeling lonely. They think, "How can I feel lonely when so many people love me or depend on me?" But emotional dependence is not the same thing as emotional intimacy. Someone can depend on you heavily without truly seeing your soul. This distinction matters deeply because many emotionally burdened people confuse being needed with being emotionally nourished. But giving connection is not the same thing as receiving connection. One of the deepest Buddhist lessons is understanding that suffering grows whenever the true self remains hidden beneath attachment, fear, or performance. And many calm people perform emotional stability so consistently that eventually nobody realizes how deeply they need emotional shelter too. This is why emotional healing often begins with honesty. Honesty about exhaustion, honesty about loneliness, honesty about emotional needs, not dramatic emotional collapse, not emotional dependency, just truth. The truth that says, "I cannot always be the strong one. I want to feel emotionally safe too. I want relationships where I can rest emotionally." These truths are powerful because they reconnect you to your humanity. Many emotionally dependable people spent years believing their role was to hold others together, but no soul can survive endlessly pouring emotional energy outward without eventually feeling empty inside. And perhaps this is one of the deepest reasons loneliness appears. The spirit becomes tired of being emotionally useful while remaining emotionally unseen. Healing begins the moment you stop measuring connection by how much people need you and start asking a deeper question instead. Who truly sees me when I am no longer performing strength for them? The hardest burden is often the one nobody sees. The calm smile, the patient voice, the quiet strength everyone depends on. For so long, you carried emotions that were never fully yours. You became the safe place, the listener, the peacemaker, the one who stayed steady while your own heart slowly grew tired in silence. But Buddhist wisdom reminds us of something deeply important. Compassion should never require losing yourself. Peace should never require hiding your pain. And strength should never mean suffering alone. Tonight, maybe you finally realized that your feelings matter too. Your exhaustion matters too. Your inner peace deserves protection too. And perhaps healing truly begins the moment you stop trying to carry the emotional weight of the entire world and finally allow yourself to breathe again. If this message spoke to a part of you that has been quietly hurting for a long time, leave a comment below with the words, "I deserve peace too." Sometimes one honest sentence can become the beginning of healing, not only for you, but for someone else reading it in silence tonight. And if you want more deeply healing Buddhist teachings like this, subscribe to the channel and continue this journey toward inner peace with us.